Tēnā tātou e te whare. E mihi ana ki a koutou katoa, ko tai mai tēnei ata. E mihi hoki ki a koutou, kei te ao hiko hiko, e hono mai ana, e mihi ana ki a koutou hoki. Hei timatanga, he karakia timatanga, hei whakatūwhira I tō tātou hui tēnei rā. Kia hihiri tātou, pau hihiri, pau rarama, pau o te whakaaro, pau o te aroha, te pau e here nei a tātou, mauri ora ki a tātou, haumi e, hui e, tae ki. Korehi te manu, takari mai te ata, ka ao, ka awatea, ti hei mauri ora. Korehi te manu, the bird sings. Takari mai te ata, the day breaks. Ka ao, ka awatea, it is light, it is brilliant light. Ti hei mauri ora, behold the breath of life. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the 2023 Early Years Research Centre Conference at the University of Waikato. My name is Dr. Melissa Darby and I am co-director of the Early Years Research Centre together with my colleague and friend, Dr. Olivera Kamenarats. The Early Years Research Centre at the University of Waikato is hosted by the Wilf Malcolm Institute of Educational Research in the Division of Education. It includes scholars who have an active interest in the early years, which are defined as children aged 0 to 8 years old. The three main research themes of the centre are pedagogy, policy, and community connections. I'd like to acknowledge the work of Professor Margaret Carr, who was the first director of the centre, Professor Linda Mitchell, who took over the directorship from Margaret, Professor Sally Peters, who held the role of Associate Director for a number of years, and Associate Professor Amanda Bateman, who directed the centre before she returned to Wales last year. It is our privilege as the current co-directors of the Early Years Research Centre to host our 7th conference since the centre's inception in 2013. Today, we join together to celebrate 30 years since the draft of New Zealand's early childhood curriculum, Te Whāriki, was produced. The University of Waikato had an integral role in developing Te Whāriki, and names like Professor Margaret Carr, Sir Tamati and Lady Tilly Reedy, Professor Linda Mitchell and Professor Sally Peters, among others, will be familiar to many of us here today. We are also so fortunate to have Emeritus Professor Helen May here with us as our distinguished keynote speaker. I will let Olivera introduce Helen formally, but I do want to acknowledge Helen's central role in Te Whāriki in early childhood, both 30 years ago and in subsequent years. Ka nui ki a koe, ka nui te mihi ki a koe, Helen. In addition to Helen, we have a wonderful program for you today, full of exciting presentations on a range of kaupapa. We are thrilled to be concluding our conference this year with a special plenary presentation from Professor Marek Tessa and Dr. Sonia Arndt. Before I pass to Olivera, I would like to thank our colleagues at the University of Waikato for their input into making today a reality. Olivera and I could not have done it without you. And I would also like to acknowledge Te Kura Toi Tangata School of Education and the Wilf Malcolm Institute for Educational Research at the University of Waikato for their sponsorship and support. Without further ado, I would like to pass to my colleague and co-director of the Early Years Research Centre, Dr. Olivera Kamenarats, to introduce our keynote speaker. Kia ora.
E mihi ana ki a koe, Melissa. Kia ora tātou katoa, kua karapine mai nei tēnei rā. Ko Olivera Kamenarats tōku ingoa, ko pō ako I te kura koi tangata, I te whare wānanga o Waikato I kirikiri roa. Nō reira, tēnā koto, tēnā koto, tēnā koto, katoa. It is a great pleasure to introduce our conference keynote, Helen May, Emeritus Professor at University of Otago and Adjunct Professor at Victoria University of Wellington. Helen is a New Zealand education pioneer, nationally and internationally regarded as eloquent activist and education academic with a strong feminist focus on early childhood education. Helen's advocacy has been characterized by its emphasis on the rights and needs of children and teachers, expressed by an active and collaborative collaboration with educational institutions, trade unions, the Ministry of Education, and other government agencies. Helen May has spoken and published extensively, nationally and internationally, on the early childhood curriculum, history, and early childhood education policies. Helen's publications have been provocative readings and amazingly rich resource for our students, teachers, policymakers, scholars in education research and women's studies. Her books, particularly Discovery of Early Childhood and Politics in the Playground, are valued texts for our students in teacher education. Helen also has firm roots as an early years practitioner. She started her career as a junior school teacher and childcare worker and was the first president of the Early Childhood Workers Union and coordinator on Victoria University Crash. Her academic career has been as a teacher's college and university lecturer, professor, and dean of education. In 1987, Helen began the work in teacher education, Hamilton's Teachers College, and later, after the institutional merger in 1991, became senior lecturer and head of the Department of Early Childhood Studies at University of Waikato. During the early 1990s, with the overwhelming support of early childhood organizations and academics, Helen and Margaret Carr developed a proposal for early childhood curriculum project that became Te Whāriki. To reflect the territory of Waitangi, they formed partnership with the Kohanga Reo Trust, Tamate Ridi and Tili Ridi, and set the fundamental structures of the bicultural curriculum that had stood strong over all these years. Here, I also want to pay tribute to Margaret Carr for her inspirational work with Helen in developing the curriculum and pioneering work on developing learning stories as a sociocultural approach to assessment. In combination, the curriculum and associated narrative assessment approaches have transformed early childhood education in New Zealand and worldwide. During Helen's and Margaret's early curriculum development work, they may not have envisaged 30 years celebration of Te Whāriki draft. Yet, here we are today, gathered to celebrate this 30th anniversary. Helen's keynote is entitled Journeys with Te Whāriki, 1990s to 2020.
Mihi mahana, kia koutou katoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Yes, sorry, we've been recorded twice there. Greetings, everybody, and thank you for the very warm welcome. 30 years is a long time, and it is almost unmanageable. So this is a seminar about Te Whāriki, but my presentation on journeys with Te Whāriki has a diversionary introduction. Now we seem to have, what's happened here? You have lost the, I don't want that on at all. I want the, do we click this? Pardon? No. So I want to slideshow.
Yeah, so the problem we're having,
What's happened?
for some reason, the audio is doubling.
I want to go back to
Over
there.
here.
Apologies for this. We thought, right. Okay.
Yeah, so what we could do, Lev, is we could abandon the lapel mic and then just have to speak directly through here because oh, okay. Okay, yeah, do that. Sweet. All right, cool.
This is nerve-wracking.
Is the is the audio going through?
So can I start?
Okay.
I can start.
It's not an online presentation unless there are
Okay. All right. Well, I was going to say that my journeys with Te Whāriki have a diversionary introduction. And we've already been diverted once by technology. But I want to put on my historian's hat here and possibly a reminder that Te Whāriki is only a capsule in time and created out of the rich traditions of early education from the past. And I have a large collection of historical images of young children. Actually, I understand there's still one or two sitting up in the corridors up there, which I put up many years ago. But I've got 18th, 19th century etchings of photographs from the late 19th century. However, art is very rare, almost non-existent. And I want to show you 3 paintings from earlier times and a montage of photos. And this painting that I've put up here is its unveiling. I bid for it in an auction about 6 weeks ago, sitting in Lausanne at the opposite end of the country, online to a Dunbar Sloan auction, and I got it. Unseen, but I just looked at that, and that is the title of it, Kindergarten Playgrounds. There is no other painting I am aware of in this country that has chosen to depict a kindergarten plays as what the artist wants. The artist was an Aucklander, quite well known in her time for watercolours of coastal scenes around Auckland and bunches of flowers, beautiful bunches of flowers. And there were several others of hers in the auction. I tried to find out from the estate that it came from a little bit more information, but have not been successful. Unfortunately, there was somebody bidding against me, and I hope it wasn't somebody in this room. I didn't tell anybody. There were several people I really wanted to tell what I found, and I thought, no, they might want it. But somebody did, and I had to pay a bit more than I expected, but it wasn't outrageous. So this is an interesting painting here. I believe it is an Auckland kindergarten, but I cannot work out which one. I believe it's 1950s looking at or late 1940s. It's no later, I don't believe. But if you look at the equipment there, you look at the dress of the children there, I think that's what dates it. I think the painting itself is, I've had a look at a photograph album I have of Auckland kindergartens in 1949. Constance Colgrove got given a photograph album which had sets of photographs of every kindergarten in operation at that time, about 12 of them. So it wasn't many. And the architecture doesn't quite match it, because that is not purpose-built, I don't believe, but it has a veranda, and not many people were purpose-building kindergartens at that stage. But haven't yet found it, but I will keep hunting, because I would like to be able to name the kindergarten. And probably it will depend where it eventually goes, because although I'm having it on my wall for a while, I think it should go somewhere else at some stage. But this image is rich in curriculum symbols, many of which we could see embedded in Te Whāriki. But there are key aspects of Te Whāriki which are not apparent here. But it's a wonderful characterization of the possibilities of outdoor play, cooperation between children, a non-interfering teacher, which I think is delightful here. There's not a whiff of intentional teaching here at all. The intention is that the play materials are the curriculum. So this is its official unveiling, and I've actually got it at an art curator has it at present, who's going to reframe it, because it was the framing and everything was in very poor condition. But I was very nervous coming back to New Zealand to see it, because I had bid for it unseen, and you don't go bidding for paintings unseen. So this is my find. But here's another one. Some of you who have a school background may recognize the book there. It's got a very interesting Hamilton connection, painted by Dora Rydell, who spent many, many weeks in Fairfield Infant Classroom, as it was called at the time, to draw the pictures, the images that would go in the little reader, the first ready-to-read reader called Going to School. And she did a couple of those very first books, the very first New Zealand Aotearoa reading books for very young children in the country. And she just didn't do it out of her imagination. She did this from live images of children. The daughter of Dora Rydell actually is Anne Smith. And so that is another rather nice connection. But the first decade of my career was spent as a junior school teacher in different times, at the tail end of a progressive era where we enacted the belief in our junior classrooms that children learn through play and discovery. And it was deemed such an important aspect of the junior school curriculum. It is what we did when the children arrived at school, right through at least to morning tea time. By the end of my teaching time, I ran an all-day play activity classroom. And the children learnt to read, they learnt their numbers in amidst it all. But it was about it was seen to lay the social and intellectual foundations for the day's activities. And it's celebrated in the government's reading book of going to school. It's playful. And again, there is no teacher in sight, which I again find quite interesting. On some other pages, the teacher is there. But in this, it actually was quite controversial because she painted about 1959, I think, or I've said 1960 here. And when it was released, the books were released, a number of classes still actually weren't operating their classes like this. And so there was a lot of debate as to the mismatch between what was happening in some classes and what was supposed to be happening. But this was junior school teaching. Now I'm going to return, I showed this image several years ago at an NZEI ministry hui on celebrating curriculum. Taking Te Whāriki to school was the name of my presentation, and I'm going to return to this later. But the playfulness has been lost for several decades, but is in a way being rediscovered. My third image, I had recently been appointed as professor at Victoria University, and I was having a holiday in Nelson and went to an art exhibition and saw this painting. I didn't care what it cost me $1,000. I didn't care what fund it was going to come out, so it came out of my purse first, but eventually Victoria University paid for it, and unfortunately when I left Victoria University I had to leave it there. But it is up on the wall at Victoria University. But there is an oil version of this painting, which was owned by Judith Duncan, the late Judith Duncan. But here we have this wonderful image of the creative arts. Again, no adults in sight, serious art. The children are serious artists. And so it all says something about curriculum prior to Te Whāriki. My final set of images is a collection of photographs. The Auckland Kindergarten Association in the 1970s, 80s, put together a sort of a training collection of slides, and I've been through them. And I've just pulled out a sampling of the slides on their outdoor play prior to Te Whāriki. This is a delightful wildness. The paint's off the paper, it's on the windows, it's on the walls, the water's everywhere, the children are climbing on everything. There is no safety plan here. There's a riot of colour and junk in an environment. And the environment is continually changing. The view was that children should have control of their environment. Was Te Whāriki needed? If this was going on, why did we need Te Whāriki? I wondered whether these children were having a lot more independent fun than what we now allow children. The adults are mainly absent. I did actually find, I think there is an adult sort of in the background of one photo down there, but they certainly were not present in the photograph collection. The curriculum was being enacted through the environment and its materials. Not that the teachers were not busy, but one of the things that Te Whāriki did do, or has done, is reposition the role of teachers. And I'm particularly so in the refreshed version. But like Te Whāriki, these images just capture a capsule in time of early education, a snapshot of curriculum in action. And while Te Whāriki's capsule stretches over 30 years and has been enacted across a much wider stage and very diverse settings, there is still a before Te Whāriki curriculum story, and we shouldn't forget it. And we have still yet to write the post-Te Whāriki curriculum story. And I think it is probably time to start thinking what that might be and whose pen is going to do it, because it will happen at some point. But my first diversion has ended, and so let's start the Te Whāriki journey. These got added in once I got my painting, you see. So officially, journeys with Te Whāriki. For my journey, I have not got any new slides. I decided to cull slides from the many, many presentations I have done that illustrate some of the significant signposts in this journey. And it's a privilege again to be speaking at the University of Waikato. It is the birthplace of where Te Whāriki, 31 years ago, over several days, where it was basically birthed. With the curriculum working group, through those about 4 days, I think it was, the 4 principles and the broad framework of mana was determined at that point. Now, there have been many frontiers and many footsteps in this Te Whāriki journey, including all of you here. And I think I would have to say you have stepped far more footsteps than I have done. And so I see this as a collective journey. But this presentation is just weaving my sort of little way through it. I was at ground zero for the birth, but after its release, I have not been a frontline foot soldier of Te Whāriki. I have been involved in teacher education, but I wasn't really teaching curriculum courses. I was mainly doing history and policy. I have been a researcher for a short while. I've tended to chronicle the story, be a policy voice, do some of the international work. But in the follow-on presentation today, in the later presentations, I think we'll see a much broader weaving of the various journeys of Te Whāriki. Now, the next step in our journey, having the curriculum group here at Waikato, and we came out with that very broad framework, was to sell the idea, then elaborate, well, what might this mean in practice? We didn't know at that stage. Now, the notion of a weaving with many possible patterns had been mooted by Margaret. She was using the terms warp and weft at the time in a European fashion, and it was Tamati. He said, this has got to be a whāriki. And it happened at that stage. And this was the overhead transparency, which we were using in those days, that I put together to illustrate the idea. This was not, by that stage, we knew, a curriculum where one size fits all. The notion was, this notion was extremely difficult to negotiate with the Ministry of Education. But it was a weaving, and this has become a very long journey. But 30 years on, we're still weaving it in new colours, patterns. But at some stage, again, I say there has to probably start a new weaving at issue, and at post-Te Whāriki times will be who weaves it. But we can see in this image here, I've got the Freuble weavings alongside Pacifica, Tukutuku panels, Whāriki there. And this is, I might do a different collection of images if I was doing it now, but that's what I did 31 years ago. This personal journey with Te Whāriki has, with Te Whāriki of Margaret and myself, is just one of many, but it is sat alongside a much other people and a much wider reaction. And I've just quoted Anne Smith, who's one of many, many people who made really interesting and great statements about Te Whāriki. She's been a great friend of mine, but more particularly, she was one of the key advocates and supporter of Te Whāriki from the start. And part of the survival in those early years of Te Whāriki in difficult political times was due to people like Anne, who in various high-level policy forums defended it against opposition. So, quite rightly, Te Whāriki has been the catalyst to lively debate, new conversations, and new research, which in turn have woven into its fabric. So, before I unpack my journey a bit further, I'm going to take another bit of a diversion, because I want to acknowledge this place and its people, which to me is part of my Te Whāriki journey. 10 years ago, I spoke at the opening of your research centre at the invitation of Margaret, and acknowledged the beginnings of my academic journey that began at Hamilton Teachers College in the mid-1980s, when the world was changing for early childhood education. And there's some people I can see here, a few who were part of that change. Childcare was transferring into education. I had come out of the world of childcare battles, which are still ongoing. A 3-year qualification for early childhood education had just been won, not just for kindergarten, which had been battling for years, but to include childcare. The Before 5 policies were being formulated, not yet released, and they were about equity for children under 5 and opportunities for women. So these were very heady times, and I spoke about those at this, that was my front slide. Now, some years later, I wrote about my arrival to Hamilton Teachers College. The occasion of writing this, and I've included a short statement from it, and I'm going to read that statement, was when the Department of Education at Victoria University was demised and merged with Wellington College of Education. Now, as you can imagine, people who've been through these things, there were a lot of sensitivities. And so the Victoria Faculty of Education published a book and invited some of the people who had been part of that faculty to write a chapter. And so I wrote a chapter and I called it My Unlikely Career, because I began as a junior school teacher. That I would finish up in, as a professor was not foreseen, and wrote this story. And part of the story I wrote was about coming here to Waikato, well, to Hamilton Teachers College. And I'm going to read you what I wrote. It was in 1987. I had a 1-year-old daughter then, and I met a scholarly soulmate. And I wish Margaret was here. I would be able to, we would both grin at each other. A kindergarten teacher, Margaret Carr, also recently appointed to Hamilton Teachers College. When the 3-year early childhood qualification was introduced, in something akin to a coup, she and I, we took the lead, abandoned the ethos of the existing kindergarten qualification, biffed it out basically, and created a qualification with strong political, pedagogical, and bicultural underpinnings. The result was a standalone early childhood degree outside the realm of primary teacher training influence. And that's part of the story. And in this degree, I established a paper on the history and philosophy of early childhood that became the forerunner of discovery of early childhood. It was from teaching that course, I thought, we've got a book here. And my students did such a lot of work finding me material. And it combined my scholarly interests, political endeavours, and this course became the catalyst for many of my books that followed. When I applied for the job, which was advertised at Hamilton Teachers College the year after Margaret, I was given instructions from a colleague at the university who was going to referee me. His name was David Mitchell. And he said to me, his advice, do not mention that you are writing a doctorate. That will not do you any favours. This is Hamilton Teachers College. Do not mention that you worked in childcare. That will do you no favours at all, because the college here only did kindergarten. Talk about being a primary school teacher. Do not, on any condition, mention that you've been involved with the union. So, with most of my credentials off the shelf, I went along. I did not realise that Maris O'Rourke, and some of you may remember her, she became the first CEO of the Ministry of Education, but at that stage was working in the Auckland Education Board as a senior person in this new shift of childcare into education. She had given writing instructions to the senior inspector, who in those days used to sit on all the interviews for people getting a job in a teacher's college. So the senior inspector was sitting there, one of about 8 men. There were no women in the interview. There was no early childhood person in the interview. Anyway, they must have taken note and I got appointed. Now, this was not an easy beginning for Margaret or myself, because she had been appointed the year before as the very first kindergarten teacher into their kindergarten training program. It didn't have kindergarten teachers running it before then. So we sort of teamed up. We felt like we were two naughty girls at times. So when Margaret and I were here in our junior staff positions, the early childhood program was significantly framed by the school subjects. So you had early childhood maths, early childhood music, early childhood art, early childhood science. Those were the courses. And within the early childhood courses, and there weren't very many, they were framed by the activities. So I used to run a course that had 3 weeks on water play, 2 weeks on blocks, 1 week on jigsaws, and on it went. So we had the opportunity to create new spaces for early childhood education within a university education institution because we were merging. It was the Department of Education, as were most in New Zealand, were framed around psychology and child development. There was no early childhood education, much so to speak, unless it was in that paradigm. These Waikato Hamilton Teachers College initiatives were the trial runs for us for what became Te Whāriki. That shifting the paradigm, even within a university context, it was possible, we did it. That invading and colonizing protected tertiary spaces could be achieved here anyway. And I was fortunate at the timing of my academic career to be on a wave that made this possible for me here, then at Victoria, then at Otago. Sadly, the landscape has shifted in recent times and the spaces that we created are being closed and removed. But my Te Whāriki journey is absolutely embedded alongside this journey of early childhood education into academia. Now here at Waikato is also where I forged some long-term academic partnerships and friendships I want to pay tribute to. And my great colleague Sue Middleton, who some of you might recognise here in 3 of those images, we had a bit of a catch-up yesterday. We keep in touch. But Sue Middleton was working on her doctorate and was the only female academic in the Department of Education. It was some years later that these pictures were taken as us young things, as we were then, were unbeknown to us then, actually climbing the professorial ladder. But no one then would have believed it or predicted that it was possible, and probably we didn't either, but we did it. But if you look there, there's Alison Jones, Kay Morris-Matthews, Jane Ritchie, myself and Sue Middleton, our publisher, all as our young things sort of publishing our early work, which was supported hugely here at this university. So let's go back to the Te Whāriki journey. We don't have much of a pictorial record of the process, and it is such a shame. But alongside consulting with and selling the idea of Te Whāriki with the sector, the most important group, the most powerful group, we realised was the Ministry of Education's own advisory group, who Margaret and I, in our, I'll say this for Margaret, dazzling younger years, just look at us, briefing. We were actually hugely fortunate at the composition of this group. This is a who's who of early childhood. And in some ways, we had put together our own working groups, and we had deliberately left some people off because the ministry then, we knew the ministry had to appoint people to their working groups. And these were some of the suggestions, and they picked many of them up. And so we have here Helen Bernstone from Wellington College of Education, Marion Suter from Palmerston North. We have Sarah Taoni, who was working in the union at that stage, Rahira Barrett-Douglas from here, and Carol Hamer, who was an early childhood person in the ministry. So for this draft, we were it. This is the group. Interestingly, the minutes of that Ministry of Education group have fallen into my hands just recently. And it's very interesting seeing all the comments as other people gave advice and comments, but really they gave us brilliant support. And we would never have got it through the system without that group of women actually supporting it within the ministry. Oopsie. So, having survived ministry scrutiny and convincing the minister, Lockwood Smith, that this indeed was a curriculum was a bit more difficult. But again, we were indebted to Maris O'Rourke, CEO of the ministry. But it's significant that the ministry did not launch Te Whāriki on the release of the draft to centres. It was seen as so little of significance, was attached to the document, or they did not want to draw too much attention to it. I don't know, but there was no, they just posted it out to centres. That was it. But it was pretty politically fragile. Why was it not called a curriculum? I mean, Lockwood Smith would not allow it to be called a curriculum, this was the minister, because it didn't look like one, but it did get published. But there were two independent launches of the 1993 draft, and one was here, the first was here at Waikato. Wilf Malcolm, who the research centre is named after, was a keen educationalist, keenly supported our contract, had really negotiated hardball with the Ministry of Education on that contract. It took a year to negotiate, and we got everything we wanted, financially as well as in every other way. He said he wanted to launch it if the ministry wasn't going. So the university launched that curriculum. And so Tamati and Tilly came up, and we had a great launch. But the second launch was by Secure, the union, and not the ministry. And I want to acknowledge the ongoing role of the union, and it's lovely to see you here, Jeanette. Secure and later NZEI, their protective and supportive hand was instrumental, first of all, in Margaret and I bidding for the contract. It was Claire Wells who rang me after attending the meeting in Wellington of early childhood organisations, where the ministry announced that there would be a curriculum and there was concern about it. She rang me and said, listen, this is going on. And of course, I really didn't know what was happening down in Wellington. And she said, would you consider putting a group together and bidding? I sort of gulped. I said, just a minute. And so I walked down to Margaret's office and said, I've just got Claire on the phone and this is what she's asking. Margaret also gulped. And I said, look, I'm going to contact the Kohanga Reo Trust. And so that's how it started. But it was the union, and they said, we will support you every inch of the way if you will put in a bid. And they took a crucial role in keeping the sector together. This became a journey that was hand in hand with the profession. And unlike the development of the school curriculum, all the examples in the early documents came from the profession. So the opening statement at the conference, it was the journey's start. And I'll read you what we said. I think I was the one of first doing the talking at the first part of our presentation. Then Margaret took over. This occasion is most timely in coinciding with the release of Te Whāriki to centres this week. So it's been posted out. In the workshops today, we will be suggesting ideas for beginning to use the document. It is you as practitioners, notice we don't call them teachers, who will decide whether the curriculum can be made to work for children or whether it remains a glossy production on the shelf. Well, it did stay on the shelf in some places. It's most fitting that the union has taken the lead in setting up this conference, and that so many people working in early childhood have travelled to a conference that is not about wages and conditions or bulk funding, which was huge at the time, or the election, grim as those things might be, but have come to listen, debate, talk, learn about early childhood curriculum, and most of all, be thinking about the children we work with. And that was the beginning again of the union putting its hands around me, us. So just a few more pictures I did find. From the start, Margaret and I did many joint presentations. And then we started to do, we couldn't always be together, and we started our separate journeys, one's nationally and one's internationally. I think our first travels began in 1993, just as it was launched. And we took it overseas fairly nervously to begin with, and that we were taking sort of to get affirmation, well, to sort of say, oh, it's okay, but maybe you should, because we knew it was only a draft. But the opposite happened. It seemed to, people became hugely interested, and this notion of TeWhāriki crossing borders began very early. Through the 1990s, later 1990s, 2000s, we could name a number of countries, some of whom actually profess at the beginning of their curriculum document will pay tribute to TeWhāriki. The language of belonging, becoming, belonging, well-being, contribution started to infiltrate other documents. And the notion of a framework rather than the content seemed to shape a lot of thinking. But that was, we had no idea that would happen. So this is Margaret and I don't know where we are, having dinner in some place, you know, as we did. 1995, I said farewell to Victoria, and this is sort of one of these poignant photographs. The team here took me down to Victoria, and this was my welcome at Victoria, and I'm talking to Margaret at this official welcome, and she's looking rather mournful, and I think we're both in tears, but a new collaboration began. Margaret was by then starting to work on her learning stories, and myself working with NZC, and in parallel with Margaret, we began some work on teaching stories. But the curriculum is a political text, and the historic image below is one that others will have seen, is the 1996 launch. This time, it's the Prime Minister is suddenly launching it, and they're calling it a curriculum that has been noticed around the world. They're using this world class. Wow. And it's the Prime Minister in the beehive. So the shift was quite dramatic. However, we were deeply concerned about some aspects of the original conception of TeWhāriki had been lost. The Pacifica curriculum had been pulled out. The home-based curriculum had been pulled out, and same with children with special needs. These all had their own journey through the original draft. The separate exemplars were all lost. On the other hand, the broad pedagogical principles had survived untouched. And it would have been political suicide for TeWhāriki if we had not supported it. And so it's one of these pragmatic compromises sort of made for the greater good. But all through this journey, many of us have had to sort of decide, how far do we go before we say no? And how far do we pragmatically support? And it has been difficult at times. So this is one of my favorite pictures. This was taken 2013. I think it was again soon after the conference here. We decided that the TeWhāriki papers needed to get into the Turnbull Library. And so I came up here, and Margaret and I spent several days. We also knew that somebody was wanting one of the little offices where they were all stored, and we might lose them if we didn't do it fast. So we catalogued the whole lot, and it was a real trip down memory lane. One of the most interesting collection of papers there was some great big sheets of paper that Tamati translated the concept of mana onto. while Margaret, who has neat writing, took notes on it, and these big sheets of paper of what these big terms meant are in the Turnbull Library now. Really interesting to look at. But all the feedback we got, everything is there. And so that is us doing our task. So this is the only photograph of the four of us. And I've often reflected on the kind of role we played in fronting Te Whāriki, because in the school curriculum processes that have happened over the years, the writers have been under the radar in many cases, been kept under the radar, and we wouldn't allow ourselves to be kept under the radar because it was just a different way of working. But there we are, it's, I suppose, from the early 90s and later, with our backroom involvement in the later versions, I've often wondered, and Peter Moss is somebody who's reading, I've always admired his writing, but he's quite stern on people he calls policy wonks, who shape education policy and its documents with the promises of new technologies. And I've often wondered, oh gosh, were we policy wonks? And he was at a seminar in London once where I put this to him. To what extent did we buy into it to shape the government's agenda? Because we were doing this, at the bidding of political power brokers at the time of new right economics and agendas? Were we framing a politically acceptable agenda for children and childhood? Did we compromise too much? Were we silent on too many things? And as academics, do we as critic and conscious stand outside the fray and critique, or do we enter the arena? And I suppose at this stage, Margaret and I entered the arena with all its constraints and have a go at challenging the discourse. And in this case, I think we did it, but there were many compromises. But we did try and create a new language. So throughout the journey, the document's been packaged in various ways. The words and the details have changed, and there's been many pens. Political and pedagogical interests have had a go in its various versions and draft. But what has been consistent, and why Margaret and I and Tilly and Tamati have supported each version, is that the original principles and strands and goals have remained unchanged, almost word for word. In fact, we did basically, I would use the word threaten or put nicely, that if these were changed, it wouldn't be Te Whāriki, and Te Whāriki couldn't be, that it would be, you'd have to be something else. So they've stayed. It's not coincidental, though. The journey of Te Whāriki over the past 3 decades has sat alongside the transformation of teacher education and a journey towards professionalisation and in the early childhood sector in terms of qualifications. The vision of a fully qualified professional sector, still not realised, was implicit in the original document that was developed. So we had this thing, we have to position it in that domain, but in language that is accessible by many people who would not have been trained in early childhood. And so that was one of our challenges. Now, as the political landscape, now some of you will have seen these slides before. As I said, I've just had a fish through my big collection. The political landscape and the backdrop has shifted across the time frame of Te Whāriki. I don't have one of the national government that was in power at the time, but government interests in childhood have been framed by shifting philosophical and political views about the role of government. And if we see, here's our Minister of Finance with the baby. And this is around the time the free early childhood policy was announced back in 1997 it was introduced. That's a 1994 budget picture. And that was the newspaper's take on what had happened with free early childhood being announced. But then we go into a 10 years or more of a national government where the only babies the ministers would hold were the vulnerable. And the other baby, he's saying, don't you know how much you'll eat? He's not mine, you keep it. And so this is mothers and babies. And now we've had the Labour government, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, which came in with aspirations of child well-being and more child-centred policy, child poverty. We've got question marks as to how far and how successful that journey's gone. We've also had a number of documents. As an historian, I try to understand the deeper context of policy. There's a sense of before and after Te Whāriki, but I suggest we should think of before and after the 1989 reforms that created an integrated policy infrastructure. Te Whāriki followed in the aftermath of Before 5. Prior to this, there was minimal interference in the plays of childhood by government. There were pedagogical understandings in kindergarten and in play centre. There were developing pedagogies that were a catalyst for reshaping our understanding of curriculum, Māori immersion, embodying te reo and tikanga, a curriculum of care in childcare and including infants, and a philosophy of inclusion for children with special needs, and very fledgling Pacifica, the notion of a Pacifica curriculum, and that was very fledgling. These were both established and fledgling understandings. But the various policy documents we've got here over the years, some have been in tune with Te Whāriki, but some have been philosophically absolutely out of tune. So if we look at the agenda for children, amazing agenda for children, it is a policy framed around the vulnerable child and targeted funding. And outputs versus rights of children, women, equity across the education system. And most recently, we've had the government's promises around investing in infrastructure, turning the tide. We'll come to that picture. Good intentions, I think, have been mired with some poor implementation. Yet, Te Whāriki has surfed through it. It's survived. It somehow has managed to clutch at all of them. And another person I would like to just add her voice to it. These were comments written 10 years ago, but Te Whāriki during the time became part of the everyday language of early childhood. And she says one of the functions, this is Joss saying one of the functions of Te Whāriki is to provide a rallying point for the profession in the face of political change. Which again, I don't think we had anticipated. And there's since been another book come out, but that's 10 years ago. Also in 2013, a number of things happened that year. The government hosted a conference for its OECD partners. It was also 20 years since the release of the draft of Te Whāriki. The member countries asked the New Zealand government, this is the national government, to have the conference around Te Whāriki, which I don't think was something the ministry actually had expected it would do, but they did it. And I was privileged to speak from an historical perspective on the 20-year journey with Te Whāriki and the roller coaster we had been through in terms of policy and pedagogy. I was very mindful, though, I was speaking at a showcase international audience. I wasn't up there trashing it, but it had been a roller coaster. Sir Tamati and Lady Tilly Reedy reflected on what Māori meant from, what Te Whāriki meant from a Māori perspective. And their words capture the powerful aspiration statements about Te Whāriki as a Māori, a tapestry of life, available to anyone and everyone in New Zealand and the world. At the time in my presentation, and this is what I said, we are currently at a crossroads with Te Whāriki. We are still travelling with Te Whāriki. One of the things that New Zealand as a whole has done is invest in time, and I think that is probably the most important thing. Other countries which developed curriculum after us have developed other ones, dumped them, moved on, all sorts of things. We haven't. We have stayed the course. But we also know, I said, we can do better. Now, this was in the beginnings of that lead up to the idea that there should be a new curriculum, or they didn't use the word refresh then, but Te Whāriki was being discussed. We were in the slow lead up, as I said, to what became the refresh. But an important moment This event was hosted by Hekia Parata, who was the new Minister of Education. She was stunning there. It also helped hugely that she was the niece of Tamati and Tilly, who made their pitch very strongly there. So in a sense, despite her political persuasions and that, we had a sense that TeWhāriki was in good hands because she was great. So we are indebted actually to her that we got a refresh and not a new curriculum, because it was certainly on the cards. Now, I'm going to, if I can do it, this NZ, I want to come back to the union. It has been NZEI who, at 20 years of age, and this was the new curriculum, not the draft of it, put out the celebration video. I'm only going to show you a little bit because of time, but it's got some thinking and comments from people at that stage. Much of it still resonates. And let's hope it works. What's happening here? Oh dear. And it goes back. Sorry, we thought this would. Okay, still going. It's not going yet. Okay. How are we going for time? Okay. Okay, let's read it.
It's our first curriculum. It was.
We may need. It'll take too long, we'll leave it. Hmm? You think, professional. Okay, well, let's just put it. Okay. We need to, how do I get this? No, it's, I haven't got the thing on. Okay, it's a pity we can't see that because it's actually got Margaret speaking and myself speaking about the beginnings of TeWhāriki. So some of the stuff I was going to tell you about how it happened is on that video. However, I do have copies of it, and if anyone would like to see that, and we might be able to put it up on Zoom for later, because it would be nice to see that. That also means that another video clip of will not be shown either. But never mind. Let's just move on then. Let's fast forward then to 2017. This was how TeWhāriki was announced by government. I mean, I was gobsmacked to see that this is, they called it world-leading early childhood curriculum. All rather bland. The policy wonks had their hand on the pen in a subtle but not to scare way and to get consensus. I personally, it actually says that it's, I think it's too ambitious. This actually says that a well-constructed curriculum is essential to ensuring children have the best start in life. I think that's a bit ambitious. I think it's a bit idealistic to say that the curriculum itself makes changes. It's more that. It can be, however, a springboard to enactment. It all depends, however, on the infrastructure that surrounds it. And certainly, we have issues with the infrastructure. We have a very different scene now to what we had in the early 90s, a significant upgrade in qualified staff and the substance of qualifications. But this time it was Minister Parata who launched the curriculum, the updated curriculum, with a grand occasion, not at the Beehive, but the Ministry of Education. And I was asked to speak on behalf of Margaret and myself. Margaret was overseas. The process had actually been pretty challenging. There were many pens at work on that refresh with multiple agendas. And the people who really knew what they were doing or saying often got their pen rubbed out and didn't get their say in. The reaction to the early drafts was not good. We four had been appointed to an advisory group, but we were very much at hands off. But Margaret and I think, put together about a 30-page document critique of the first draft we saw. But what was intact was the principles and strands still. And in the event, I think we did get a document we could work with. I think we certainly did. I mean, we all might have liked to have seen something different or something didn't, but there was some adjustment to those early drafts. But there was interesting times, because at this very same time, the Ministry of Education was considering signing up to an OECD international assessment project, comparative, that would have totally undermined Te Whāriki. And a number of us protested, and Margaret did a lot of work in this very, very strongly. And so very carefully at that launch, where I had everybody who was anybody in the ministry in front of me, I raised the issue and talked about the risks to the new Te Whāriki. And I added some sensible ones in, but finished up. One of the risks would be if the government signs up to the OECD. Now, we were very pleased when they didn't, fortunately. Okay, now I'm just watching time here. Okay. More recently, we offer, yeah, okay. I've been interviewing teachers and teacher educations who work or are students with Te Rita Maiaho. And I've written a book in celebration of its 60th birthday, which is down the bottom there. It's still being typeset, but they've got the cover. One of the stories that I wanted to canvas in this book was the refreshed Te Whāriki, because it was particularly looking at the last decade. And I've just selected 3 comments. Now, there were many, many comments. It was not a bad news story, but I think they were interesting just to sort of see, well, what is the sector feeling about it? And those of you out there will have much more data on this, but I've just selected 3, which I've put into the book. I didn't want to love the new Te Whāriki because I was attached to the old one, but I think it's now fantastic and builds up on what we've had before. A document actually can make a difference, and it's really pleasing to hear that. But lots of things have been going on. This is all the political stuff. And even our best teachers don't have time for professional learning now. And this was after COVID. Our understanding and implementation of Te Whāriki is suffering because of that. And I think we've been through some tough times. Another one. This was a centre up in Whangarei. The new curriculum was very clear about being bicultural. It was easy to use and understand, although it took us a while. Until that time, and that time actually was just a few months previously, it was put on our shelf. The old Te Whāriki wasn't a living curriculum for us. These were young teachers who were, the old Te Whāriki was sort of 25 years ago. This is another generation. These were young teachers, and it really woke me up, this comment. We're now more connected, perhaps because it was new, and we unpacked it together. The language feels more like us. And the other one, it's a disappointment. After almost a 30-year journey with Te Whāriki, there is the intention of a bicultural curriculum, but how much are we actually seeing out there in the early childhood services? There are still lots of excuses while people in centres are not further along in their journeys. So just a little bit of a sampling. Can you tell me the time as to, I'm okay, right. Okay. Following the launch of the refreshed Te Whāriki, the political landscape dramatically changed, and this was from my slide pretty soon after the election, into what I then called new political times. And this was a 2017 presentation These times were actually unexpected and unplanned for in many ways. When we look at the Labour Party policies summarised above, which at that stage, just a few months after they had come into power, ticking the boxes, we can see, though, that it was mainly about reinstating losses. It wasn't actually pushing us forward very much. It was about recapturing what had been taken away from us. And 5 years on, we are disappointed, even with what had been, the reinstating of what we had lost. But that was my slide from the time. In 2018, I was asked to present the Institute for Early Childhood Studies at Victoria University. And I had just written the 3rd edition of Politics in the Playground. It hadn't actually been released at that stage. And I put up my final statement that I wrote in that book, which is now came out 2019. It feels like we're waiting at the crossroads. I've said that before, I know. Positive directions have been signposted, but the degree of political resolve to implement the recommendations or turn the tide, and this is Chris Hipkins' phrasing, forcefully is not assured. There is much competition for government resources from the other education sector groups under review or in negotiation. Much will rest on the government's ability to deliver and win a second term in office. And because this is all before COVID. But already I was saying, will he turn the tide? Or is it going to be a trickle? Now, there are some of us, there are a number of us in the sector, many here, who wanted to move the policy further forward beyond just reinstating what we had. I was a member of the Strategic Plan Reference Group, as was Linda here, and I'm trying to think, was there anyone else in the audience here, a member of that group? But I can remember Chris Hipkins coming into that group, and somehow I got the job of asking him the hard question, saying, Minister, do you really mean us to turn the tide? Is that what you're looking for? And we were talking about profit and private enterprise, a whole range of things. And he said, because we said, look, it's not much point us sitting here turning the tide for you, giving you a blueprint for turning the tide if you don't really mean it. Can you win it in cabinet? Yes, be bold, he says. We were, weren't we? We put up all these very bold papers. They never got into the final draft, ever. This was the issue. However, there were opportunities. The abolition of national standards, literally within a week of the new government being formed, NZEI was very pleased, as was many of us. But it was NZEI again that took the lead. And later, the Ministry of Education joined in to host 6 national hui around the country celebrating our curriculum. And I was asked to speak on TeWhāriki. Now, I think I was expected to talk about, telling people about TeWhāriki. And I thought, well, bother that. We've been telling people about TeWhāriki for I don't know how many years. Let's take it further. And Margaret and I had tried to take it further on several times, unsuccessfully. We tried with the refresh. So this is what I said in the talk. We have the possibility of making some pedagogical shifts in early years schooling, and I don't want to miss the boat. I'm looking at the culture and pedagogy of early years schooling, and there's a continuum of possibilities we could do. We could redress the mismatch of the transition processes between early childhood education and school. National standards have had a destructive impact and a destructive reach into early childhood centres. At the other end of the continuum, I'm proposing that we take the framework of TeWhāriki and we move it into the junior school. There is no mismatch between the school curriculum, but it does require a shift in thinking by teachers about children, learning and assessment for your children. There was a great lot of cheers came up in some of the audiences. I thought, wow, I'm winning this. I later found out those were the tables with all the early childhood people cheering away, waving. However, there was quite a good reception from junior class teachers. There was a lot of feedback, people being in contact with me and later sort of saying, how do we start this? How do we do this? In my presentation, I said, politically, we could win this. The issue would be the ability of teachers in junior classes to implement it. Very few remember the time when junior classes ran playful programs. A large percentage of teachers only know about national standards. And I showed the audience my classroom from 1974, Brooklyn School, 5-year-olds. We were not a well-equipped classroom, but these children played for the day. They came in and we did all sorts of things. The little girl right down the bottom there is actually composing music. We had some chime bars and we had the alphabet letters equivalent to the chime bars, and they would make up pieces, putting the alphabet letters together and play their chime bars and music. Then they would perform it for the class, or they would do it the other way. They would play the chime bars and then write down, put up the cards for their music. These were little 5-year-olds, you know. It was, you know, some of the best times in my life. I also showed this slide. This is a Minister of Education in 1944 addressing the education conference in the war, which determined there would be a new early childhood policy after the war, preschool policy, which brought in kindergartens particularly, but also that all junior classes, it is about play. Now, we have not had a minister say anything like this since. So I decided this was going to be stated at the conference. Nothing short of a revolution has taken place in the infant room during the past 20 years. It has my full support. We must all agree that the infant room, the learning of formal intellectual skills, is of secondary importance. Would you get a minister daring to say that nowadays? What is of supreme importance is the young child should be healthy, happy, should learn to work and play with other children, that his mind should be kept lively, eager, and full of wonder. And that is what the policy, 1944, the minister was saying should be in early education. Wendy and I won't be showing this, just a brief explanation, I've had the privilege I was there for 3 years, I think it was, as a judge. I was there from, 2018, of the Prime Minister's Teaching Excellence Awards. And we have had the privilege of seeing the most amazing schools, early childhood centres, secondary schools across New Zealand. And I was going to show you an exemplar from one of them. Now, in the judging, you can't get to every school that's up as a finalist, but there was one that Wendy and I did make sure we got to. And it was an interesting one because this was a school a primary school over in Napier, Henry Hill School, I will name it because it won the award. And it was a school that had framed its whole curriculum around TeWhāriki. Now, what didn't mean to say that children weren't learning to read and this, but we said, that's us, we will visit it. And of course, they were a little shocked when they hadn't expected, I think, 2 experts in TeWhāriki to turn up and look at the school. But this was a school that actually was living in a very challenging neighbourhood. There was guns, there was gang neighbourhood. Children they had to deal with trauma. And so they framed their school curriculum around a peaceful curriculum, yoga, karakia, sensory experiences, really interesting work with the way they handled food, self-managing skills, children being inducted into self-regulation, learning about their brains. But the rationale for the whole school, they used the language of TeWhāriki. There was not one mention of the school curriculum. Now that won the award, you know. And so this is really interesting. Waimara's school was a junior school, started during national standards to take on board TeWhāriki. It sent their teachers out for once a fortnight to train in early childhood centres over 18 months. And they came back absolutely enamoured. So they shifted the whole junior school curriculum around Te Whāriki. I put my hand up to see that. I went with a secondary school principal, so it was really interesting to bounce off ideas, and it's quite useful to have somebody from the secondary teaching back your support when you're trying to negotiate who's going to win the award. But when you talk to them, they make a wonderful statement in this YouTube saying, we do not expect or want children to come who know how to write their names. We're not interested whether they can write their names. We're not interested whether they can count all their colours. If they can, fantastic. It doesn't interest us particularly what numbers they know. Then they list what does interest them, and it is totally the language of Te Whāriki. And so it was a brilliant example of a school that totally shifted. The outcome of that was once those children went into the senior part of the school, they weren't prepared to give up their play. So every classroom right throughout the school had a junk area in the classroom. They had creative play going on all the time. Children were allowed inside or outside. Every classroom was equipped with blocks right up to 12-year-olds. And so so there are some interesting things happening. However, I don't think we've had a revolution. What we've had is permission that schools can do this. And I'd love to see a revolution. But my last slide is, where did I put it? Oh, it must be somewhere else. Never mind. The whole context, I think, I just want to focus on is Te Whāriki's survival is about to what extent the infrastructure is the issues of infrastructure is interwoven with Te Whāriki and the implementation of it. Here we go. I think I might have it here. So there was one or two things I wanted to say. And I don't think this journey can't be separated from the policy journey, which has lurched alongside Te Whāriki, shaped it. It's in times hindered it. It has also enabled it. It's constrained it too. But the pedagogical work, yes, must continue. But unless we win more on the political front, we're always swimming against the tide, I suppose. So our action plan is languishing. The movement on pay parity we've had, but it's imperfectly implemented, underfunded, and the recommendations over ratios are not even on the horizon. We've rarely gained anything for early childhood education ever since I've been involved without making a noise. And this year we have been making a noise, but it still needs to be louder, united. But making a noise is not only about politics, it's also about pedagogy. The early years are the years when young children find their voice, are listened to. And the most important years of a person's life, they gain a voice. So this is the story of my latest book, which is a celebration of Te Rita Maiaho 60th Jubilee, originally the New Zealand Association of Childcare Centres. It's also written in celebration that Sonia Davies will be 100 years old this year. The organisation's advocate and founder, who taught me personally in our days of setting up the Early Childhood Workers Union and many others about finding our voice and how to use it to political advantage. So thank you for the opportunity to speak and tell a story. And just to say again, I still feel my story is very much a backroom story, a journey. The front line is where everybody out here is, and all the best.
Helen, it's always such an amazing pleasure to listen to you talk. And for me, who's been around for all the 30 years, and a lot of other people too, it just brought back so many incredible memories. But I think also for all of us, it's been really insightful. You know, the new things we've learned and the thoughts that we've had. So thank you so much. I think you talk with such flair and your images are absolutely wonderful. and also your humour. It really brings things to life. So we heard about the pre-curriculum times and the footsteps, and also your generosity in appreciating all the people who walked the journey of Te Whāriki. So it's been a great pleasure. And I want to say that I was working with the Combined Early Childhood Union of Aotearoa.
You'd have been at that conference, I think.
Yes, and I thought we were the ones who launched it. I didn't know Waikato had got in before us.
No, you got Waikato were a little bit later, I think.
So we
because you launched it the week it went out dissenting. I should have done them the other way around.
So you and Margaret spoke then of your concerns about the new seamless education path. And I'm quoting from you. You said, we may have to watch out for any unplanned and unwarranted invasions from the north. The school curriculum and the south have parents as first teachers. As a kind of pincer movement, dividing the early childhood services. And I think what I love about you is you're such a fearless and bold advocate, and there are still battles that are ongoing. So I think it's really fitting that you're talking here at this early years conference. I really wish Margaret was here too. I'm hoping she's listening on the I know she's not well today and she wanted to be here, but you two, you and Margaret are the University of Waikato people who we feel immensely proud of. And I think you with other people have changed the face of early childhood education in Aotearoa and internationally. So thank you very much. Oh, what a roller coaster, eh?
Well, I pity about the images, but they're filmed, but never mind.
It's great.
This is the one of my Mara school fascinating to see to hear these school teachers sort of using all the language of Te Whāriki. And the principal, it's a lovely experience.
You have to get those videos.
They're on the website. Yeah.
I guess I do too.
Well, I think one of the reasons I want to put the one up on the NZEO one is that Margaret, that's 17 years ago.
Yes.
So much done. Oh, that one, that first one, yeah. No, this one.
I've never seen you like that. No. Yeah.
Margaret used to curl her hair in those days. Each is interesting, yeah.
Did you enjoy that?
Have teachers that I've worked with forever, because with the teachers that create and stay. So I've worked with some of my colleagues for 22 years now, and some of them for 10 to 15 years, around 10 years possibly is when they might leave because they've found a new life, a new horizon to explore. Some of them going into primary school and implementing play-based programs there. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, so you can see that enmeshed in all of this are TeWhāriki principles. There's empathic relationships, ethical engagement, multiple stories told and retold, shifting learner trajectories, the interconnectedness of everybody in this diverse community. And yet the uniqueness of each child and each person as well. We were a dialogic community, we talked lots, and we viewed learning as lived experience. Inside is social context, and place, and time. So I love the Te Māori concept of the past informing the present into a future and mixing all of that up together. So we realised that there were many possible stories and research choices made. So this means that the pathway chosen here is contestable and is a choice made in the full knowledge that other narratives exist, that there are alternatives. But we're prepared to fight for this because it's so important to us to make sure that everybody's stories are told. So, my epistemology is positioned as a narrative inquirer, as a co-constructed unraveling a story, because this resonated with the ethos of that study. Pinniger, a chap that I really like, views that relationship is the heart of living alongside a narrative inquiry. Indeed, relationships form the nexus of this kind of inquiry space. So this means a narrative journey inside a relational research community. One of the narrative threads that came through the research was the view that in community, rarely does learning happen in isolation from others. And we all see learning as connection. As we do, we begin to understand how relationships must envelop and protect each child's growing identity as a learner, their mana, their mauri, and their wairua. So these ideas were consistently part of the narrative teachers and families relation, the ideas that they offered, and children's views of themselves. So what we found is as we began to write these stories, families began shifting their views. For example, a learning story written about the way a little 3-year-old, but less actually when he started, could use real tools in our learning centre. The feedback from his parents was that they stopped buying him plastic toys for his birthday and bought real toys. There was that way of shifting the conversation, but also we listened to the families and we put their voice into our story as well. So hearing that Blake is his name, because in terms of the ethics, families and teachers were offered anonymity, but nobody chose to use it because the learning stories are credit-based and they celebrate learning. And that's why we put the time and effort into writing it. Now, one of the things that came up from you, Helen, is, if I'm remembering right, that there isn't much time now given to people to do this kind of thing. Well, I think, and you talked about the infrastructure being there. I think that is about being a good employer and making sure that the things you value actually are given time. And when we use learning stories as a way to think about professional growth cycle and internal evaluation, use those as our evidence, then we can get rid of a whole lot of stuff. In 2000, I went down to an assessment course, a teacher refresher course in Dunedin, and I heard that kindergarten teachers were writing for every single one of their children. In those days, 45 children in the morning and 45 in the afternoon. And I came back and talked about it with our teachers. We think, oh, we can't possibly do this for all of our children because it's too much work. Maybe we can only do it for children come time. And then we realized that we have to make this just, socially just. Every single child was entitled to hear about the learning that they were immensely interested in. And I hesitate to use following children's interests anymore because I think it's gone blah. And people can say, oh yeah, they're interested in dinosaurs. Well, actually they're not necessarily. They might be interested in sitting next to the child who's interested in dinosaurs, but they're interested in friendships. So thinking about those dispositional underpinnings that follow children's lives. And thinking too about the working theories that they had. And they were the two main learning outcomes from the original TeWhāriki, let alone the 117 but the two essential ones were those. And so that makes me worry about when Ero comes and says, we want to know how you're implementing the 20 outcomes from TeWhāriki. Are you kidding me? Anyway, that's another story for another day. So let's get stuck into a child's stories because I'm not sure how much time we've got. Oh, okay. Sorry, I've been rabbiting on. Yeah, okay. So this is the story written for Kira, and it's called, actually the story is called From Her Words. When I look back at my learning stories, I remember all the things that make me a great learner. And the whakatoki that is embedded in the story is kia, whakatuamuri te hari whakamua. I walk backward into the future with my eyes fixed on my past. And, oh, sorry. So what happened here was that she was having a little bit of trouble figuring out what to do, because she got stuck when she was trying to make a book. You can see her there on the top, figuring out how to make a book. And her teacher, Molly, said to her, well, do you remember when you got stuck last time and we wrote a learning story for you? And she said, yeah, maybe we could go back and have a look at that and see what you did. And so she was quite happy with that idea. So they went over and got her portfolio. And Molly says in the story that she thought that it would be that they would just look at that particular story, but she wanted to come back and read the whole thing. And so I can't actually see very easily from the notes there exactly as she said. So I'll just see if I can find it on my computer. So Molly says, Kira, you had a plan, and with this, you tuned into your hinengaro, your mind, with a steadfast flow. After gathering the resources that you needed to make your book, you sat down and began to persevere with bringing this plan into action. In undertaking a creative plan, more often than not, you are met with surprise, uncertainty, and challenge. Today was no exception. Being the resourceful learner that you are, I watched as you began to tackle the problem from different angles. And these are her words. This is still too tricky. I need some help. I remember a time, and Molly said, I remember a time when you had a very similar plan. Should we look at your book and see how you conquered this challenge and achieved your learning goal? Yes, that's a good idea, said Kira. I thought of showing you the story, Kira's perseverance, but you decided to start at the beginning, and together we revisited all your learning stories. You revisited your stories with great pride, and it seems to me that this was a moment that nurtured your mana. Here are some of the things you said. Yes, I can do hard things when I try really hard and when I keep persevering. I know what to do when things get tricky. I mean, wow, for a barely 4-year-old to be able to know this about herself, so reflective. And when I look back at my learning stories, I remember all the things that make me a great learner. And with this, you turn to your plan and continue to tune into your hinengaro, bringing your creative plan into fruition. So the only way children get to be able to use these words is to hear them. And when teachers talk about these dispositions, about being a creative learner, finding really big goals that are tricky but not giving up, you know, those are the kinds of things that change children's views of themselves. So this is a story about Lucas now, and it says Lucas grows his connection to TeWhāriki. Now, this is a story about going out into the forest, as you can see, and the teachers set the scene with the story, and what I really loved are the working theories that come out of this. So Lucas had been closely inspecting it for a little while, and when he told me, look at this, it's ready to pull off. And the log is still steadily decomposing and has become very soft. We chatted about decomposing with everyone offering their bits of knowledge.
Odin thought there would be microbes. Now, the reason he knows about microbes is because his mother has a florist business growing flowers. So she will have been talking about microbes. So, you know, it's very sociocultural in terms of what children know and what they're interested in. Lucas said, "Can I hear this tree breathing?" Lucas wondered as he put his ear up against a tall rimu. His attention turned back to the log. He'll turn back into soil. I think Tani Mahuta may have been on Lucas's mind. And as we often chat about how the trees are his children, Lucas pointed at some young seedlings, and he lives right over there. He died, he can turn back into soil. And Piper talked about insects living here. Lucas looked around and quietly said, "A beautiful forest over there." Now, I know that a few days later, I came along and saw the sandpit, and it had all of these big tree trunks all standing up in this large sandpit, all standing up. But I hadn't seen what had happened. And when I asked the teachers, it was Lucas saying, "I want to build a forest." And so it had lots of children help us. And mind you, there were no leaves on these trees. They were all standing up fabulously. So I'm probably running out of time. Am I? Right. Wow. So you get the idea, I hope. But what we're trying to do is really embed language, culture, and identity into these learning stories so that children get a very real sense about what it is we value. And we're raising the bar in terms of the way we talk with families. We don't talk down. These are stories that will last forever for these children. And so we want them to know that the important things are things that we're observing and we want to share. So, and Lucas's Māori shifted as he immersed himself in this deep state of flow. That's what being out in Tinahiri does to you, being out into nature. And he was awake, alert, creative, energized, and attentive. He was settled, calm, and in balance. Māori ora, Lucas's life essence and Wairua flourished with potential ideas and connections. Always, always listening to children and following in a responsive way, based in relationships, totally engaged in TeWhāriki. You might want to compare that with setting IDP goals ahead of time for a beginning of the term, which is becoming a flavour of what happens in early childhood currently, which is a very disturbing trend, I think, because outside of the child, outside of the context of learning, a plan is being made, which can narrow teachers' perspectives and miss the essence of what it means to live and work alongside a relationship with this child. So very, very sad. So I'll skip to the end. So in terms of my research, and this is what made me want to continue on to do a PhD, although sometimes I hold my head and think, what have I done? But the selection of a narrative approach meant that this thesis did not result in quantifiable measures of learning story impacts. However, measurable results would be inconsistent with the TeWhāriki sociocultural concept of complex learning. Complex learning requires complex assessment strategies to support learner self-efficacy and learners' views of how they could keep improving their learning. So I love that learning stories help children to be really reflective, but actually it's what's happening in and around inside our settings and outside of our settings that infuse children with these ideas. So, of course, in partnership with families. So all I can say is that I really hope that instead of squeezing learning stories into a format, into a pre-designed idea of what should happen in a short space of time, that actually you can free the writer from within you and be true to yourself and true to the children that we're responsible for nurturing their learning identities now and into a future life where, you know, we know not what that might be. So those dispositions and working theories are so critical. Before I wanted to write notes.
I'd just like to thank Lorraine for her amazing presentation and apologise for the technical issues. So I acknowledge that we did start the session about 10 minutes late. So what I'd like to do, I'm sure you have some questions. If I get you to come over here, Lorraine, we can take a couple of questions while I invite the whānau from the Kohanga to come down and get their presentation set up. We're going to try and do it that way. If you'd like to come and enjoy the session, if you need to go to another stream, now's your moment. We're going to So does anyone have some questions for Lorraine? I realise we're in a moment of change. Some comments perhaps. It's a little bit of a whirlwind today. If you'd like to catch up with Lorraine, you're welcome to do so during lunch. Some really profound thoughts for learning stories and some very insightful comments about getting it. So thank you very much, Lorraine. Oh, hello. This is Juana, Heather and Tori from Kohanga Reo Trust. And they're going to give us a little introduction and talk about their presentation.
O tēnā koutou, ko Juana McMillan toku ingoa, he uri tēnei no ngai te rangi, ngā te kahunu ni Ngāti Porou. I'm a lecturer here at the Whare Wānanga, and I was also the researcher supporting our whānau here from Te Kohanga Reo Tokawa in Rotorua, so we're right by the airport. And I'm also fortunate to be a graduate of that Kohanga Reo, so I'll pass the mic on to the stars.
Tēnā tātou ko Tori Ehrlich tōku ingoa, he kaiako, he māma hoki ahau no te Kohanga Reo ki Rotokawa, he uri ahau no rongo whakaata no Ngāti Raukawa te au ki te tonga hoki. Kia ora everybody, my name is Tori Ehrlich, I am a kaiako and I'm also a māma at te Kohanga Reo ki Rotokawa. And I'll pass it over to you.
Nā mihi o te ata whānau, ko Heather pate tōku ingoa, he uri au no Tainui me no te aroa, waka. He kaiako, he practitioner, he kupu hai moku, he practitioner, he kaiako hoki he te kohanga o Rotokawa. Nā mihi.
So we thought today we would come, we've been here, we were here yesterday and working with a few, with Mount Maunganui Kindergarten, as well as Pakuranga Kindergarten. And we've been working on a project together and that Linda's been leading. And so we're presenting some of our kōrero that came from that project. But being a conference about TeWhāriki, we wanted to sort of align some of our whakaaro with TeWhāriki as well. And so we hope that what we have to share today will perhaps give you something to think about in terms of mana tangata. That's our focus, and sort of sharing some of our whakaaro that have come from both our journey, but also our mahi as a Kohanga Reo, working from Te Whāriki a Te Kohanga Reo. So our presentation is titled Whiria he Taura Here Tangata, which is really about, I think we like to draw metaphors in Te Ao Māori, and it's that notion of weaving together a taura, a rope, and weaving together groups of people. And we've done that at Te Kohanga Reo Rotokawa through connections with the whenua. So I think they sort of go hand in hand. When we talk about mana tangata, there's also this connection with the whenua. Ia ki Te Whāriki a Te Kohanga Reo. So in Te Whāriki a Te Kohanga Reo, when we look at mana tangata, it speaks to us, and in terms of the mokopuna, about opportunities and experiences to learn about their whakapapa, to make those connections with their friends, as well as the whānau whānui, our iwi hapu, to have opportunities to connect with their kaumātua, and also rangi nui and papatuanaku. But what I really like about this statement is the bit around the pātahi o te whānau. For want of a translation, it speaks to me and us about the oneness of whānau and what that truly looks like. And so I've got this pāharakiki here, which was at my nan's whare, and it really needs to be tended to. But anyways, looking at the pāharakiki and that oneness, and it's how it's all interconnected in that way. So building on that sort of thinking around te pātahi o te whānau and weaving together our whānau, our taura, at Te Kohanga Reo ki Rotokawa, our practice has always been about visiting the tribal landmarks of our mokopuna. And it started very early on as we would go and visit our marae. And those trips took us many places. It took us to Kahuranaki Marae and Kahununu. We've been up north. We've been everywhere. But after a while, it evolved to wanting to connect with our maunga, our awa. And so that's the journey that we've been on together as a whānau. Unfortunately, when COVID came along, that all stopped. And so the TLRI project that we've been working on was an opportunity for us to reconnect with practices that we had been doing with our whānau in the past. And so this is sort of where we've got to at this point with the project.
So this is Juana Tererewai Atwood, and so at Kohanga, we always start off with mihi mihi, pepeha, and this is her pepeha on mum's side. So an extension of that is our project we have today and what we started to do with this project. And so we focused on Hoana for this. And so this is just one of the ways we work with the children to learn their whakapapa. So here we have the Pakeke, the older children in Hoana's group. And we've gone to Mawao to experience, I suppose, the wairua, to see the flora, the fauna, to smell the ocean, to visually see the ahua of the maunga and the surroundings. So this is the extension to her pepeha, is visiting the maunga and seeing the moana. Just the collective participation of the tamariki, feeling the wairua at Mawao and looking and hearing walking the whenua, visualising the pūrākau, the stories that we've shared with them, and giving the children the confidence to move from one learning environment to another learning environment. So in prep for our haerenga, so this is 2022 in August. So just in preparation, we focused on all the pūrākau, the stories that pertained to tauranga mawao. And from those stories, we learnt the waiata that are famous in Tauranga and to that area. Learnt the connections of the many iwi through the navigations of the waka, and creating collages or creating so this is one of our first visit to Mawao. So here we have a local guide, the tangata whenua, and he was able to share with us the history of Mawao and the extensions of the connections of other tribal affiliations to that area. He shared a hell of a lot. There was heaps. Yes, and so on top of that, there was also the sites of significance he shared with us and sites of interest about that area, not just the Maunga, but the area and further out. And we couldn't even pinpoint where he was pointing to. So just imagine that. So if that's how we felt, our kids felt the same. So it was kind of a bit daunting trying to figure out where's Otani Wainuku. It's over there somewhere. But that's another haerenga for us to go and do. So he pointed out this area, and this is the tip end of Matakana Island. And it was really interesting. So we took on board as kōrero about this. And because it spoke of hatupatu, and so the kids love hatupatu. We all do. But in his sharings with us, he spoke of hatupatu seeking a man of Tainui descent. His name was Raumati, and Raumati I kina kōrero. Raumati burnt the Te Aroa canoe, so hence why hatupatu was after him. And so this is where Raumati passed, and the name of the area is Panepane. So that was a really nice sharing from Des. And then also talking about the captain of the Tainui waka, Hoturoa, and him navigating his waka between these two, the Maunga and the island, and pushing over an old lady. And so that's how the kids are hearing the story. Oh, this old lady got pushed out of the waka. Why, crackies. But then, but then there's lots more to it. It makes you think, what really happened. So it's a lot of thinking and a lot of learning, a lot of history. So being able to connect Tainui waka coming through, and their connections to Mawao, as well as Te Aroa waka and their connections to Mawao. So weaving all of those iwi together helped all of us, parents and the children, find the connection with each other, with each of us. So it started off being a project, focused on Hoana and her pepeha, her whakapapa, her links, and yet it reflected on all of us because we were all involved in that. Yes, I think I spoke too much.
So after the haerenga, well, the tamariki went back to Kohanga with Whai Heather, and they were able to add to their artwork things that they had seen on the haerenga. Matakana appeared on their artwork, but prior to that, it was just the maunga and the beach and then the water, wasn't it, Whaia? And then after the visit, Matakana appeared, the waka appeared, as well as the pipi bed. And that was a sort of a point of, I guess, for the iwi anyway, wanting to dread yeah. And so that was interesting for the tamariki and for the whānau as well. And so from that point on, it was sort of building more kōrero in terms of, and building off of what Matua Des had shared with us in terms of the pūrākau. And so the second visit back to Mowal gave the tamariki an opportunity. So we'd taken the rōpū Pakeke. This time we took a few more tamariki, some of whom were from the group below the rōpū Pakeke, so that they were given an opportunity to now share what they had learnt about Mowal. And so it was really nice to be able to go back and revisit these same spaces that Matua Des had showed them, but also explore new spaces. So this time they were adamant, some of them, that they would go up to the tihi of the maunga. And there's lots that sits behind that, which we spoke about yesterday, and we sort of have to unpack about the significance of making it to the tihi, to the top of the maunga. But we wanted to share this little snippet of our 4-year-olds. Is this going to work? Techie people? Oh, hang on. It's doing something. No. To play the video that's embedded in the... That's fine.
So another thing that happened after the second haerenga was the parents of these tamariki that went on these haerenga, we got together and had a wānanga about the benefits or the hua, ngā hua I puta mai I ira haerenga. So firstly, I'll talk about the connections between our mokopuna. It's really exciting and interesting for our tamariki to learn about their hoa, their whakapapa and where they're from. And it really helps to create stronger relationships between them. It gives our mokopuna a sense of belonging, and it really empowers their tuakiritanga, whakamana I te tuakiri o te tamaiti. It helps them to relate to each other. One of our parents spoke about how her tamaiti was able to recite her own pepeha, but also Hoana's pepeha because of the research and the rangahau and all the mahi that our tamariki had done prior to going on these haerenga. And at times she'd get mixed up about Mowal, ko Mowal tōku maunga. And she would, even though that was not true, she was so confident in herself that Mowal was her maunga, and perhaps it was because of the strong connection she was able to make through her friend Hoana. These connections really help to, it builds our mokopuna's confidence and their self-esteem. They know then that they are a really valuable and valued member of their kohanga whānau. I'll talk to the connections between our parents. So being able to partake in these haerenga along with our tamariki, it not only strengthens the relationships between us and our tamaiti or our tamariki, but it helps to strengthen the relationships that we have with our other whānau. We get to know each other. We can make hononga a whakapapa. We can find out, oh, you know, maybe you're one of my cousins, because there's definitely a lot of those connections. And it helps us to understand that, get to know each other a bit more, get to know the people who are helping to nurture and raise our tamariki alongside us as well. Our Kohanga Reo connections. For our tamariki and our whānau at Te Kohanga Reo ki roto kaua, our Kohanga Reo is like a second home to them. It's essentially like another marae, or our marae, our tūranga waiwai. And when we're able to strengthen our connections, it helps also to strengthen our kaupapa as a Kohanga Reo. And we're all working together in unison in order to create or reach the best outcomes for our tamariki. Tribal connections. So a lot of, if not most of our tamariki at our kohanga, they have strong whakapapa links to Te Arawa. And in some cases, we have tamariki who whakapapa to other areas. So to be able to go outside of Te Arawa and visit another area was really special to them. And I'll just share something for a connection that I made personally for my daughter, because we knew and we had learnt about Hoana's whakapapa, her pepeha, her marae on matakana. Our whānau went back to our marae in Te Manawatu. And while we were looking around our whānau urupa, I saw the ingoa whānau Macmillan and Te Rangi Hauhiri, which is Hoana's marae. So I instantly made the connection, came back, and we found that even though my daughter doesn't whakapapa to Mauao, she still has a connection to her friend, and you know, we can continue to make connections with the other tamariki and our rōpū as well. Connections through loss. For the majority of our parents, there was a huge sense of loss in connection to whakapapa, iwi, hapu. A lot of them grew up without te reo Māori, without knowing, not having a strong link to where they're from. So for them to be able to participate in and see the benefits of these haerenga for their tamariki growing up in te ao Māori, it inspires them to go and to learn, make those connections themselves in order to support their tamariki even more so. And it's really a journey that it's not only for our tamariki, although they are the main focus of all of our mahi, it's a whole whānau collective working together, and it's a massive journey for all of us as well. Spiritual connections. This one for me is quite a hard one to explain because it's not something you can necessarily see. It's a feeling, it's an energy, a vibe, if you will. But prior to the second haerenga, our tamariki, they were very excited, very happy to be going back to Mauao. And once we got there, they were just very very settled. I noticed that my daughter, she wasn't very verbal on the haerenga, but it wasn't because she was tired or bored or anything. It was more that she was absorbing her environment, the taiao, and really taking in the information that she had already learned at Kohanga. It sort of added another dimension going to Mauao Tinana.
So that's us, but I guess the point we wanted to share is the way that that we see that tauta and that we've woven it together, and it's not a tauta that we see just our mokopuna and then our kaiako alongside each other, but our whānau are there, they are woven together in many ways that overlap and create a strong sense of, a strong environment where mana tangata can flourish and our te pātahi o te whānau can be recognised. So we hope that's our little koha to you all, and perhaps it might be useful to you in your own thinking. Yeah, e mihi ana kia koutou.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. Does anyone have a few questions or a question or a thought?
It's okay if you
We can come back to it during the lunch break, because I know sometimes you like to think a little bit and sometimes people like to quiet chat. Thank you so much, Whānau. Thank you also for finishing so kindly. I appreciate it. I'm having private stress over there. Then our last presentation, if you wanted to go to the other stream, now would be a good time. You probably just welcome, come in. And our last presentation for this particular stream is online. So we'll just take a moment for the ladies here. Issues in this room, and we're very thankful for the ICT team for coming and working through all of that with us. We're thankful for the two presenters who went before, for all their hard work, for the sharing of their stories. That is deeply, deeply appreciated. Our last presenter in this stream, I need to hold that closer, sorry. Our last presenter in this stream, Monica Cameron, Karen Aspen, and Penny Smith. They're going to be sharing by Zoom. So this may take us just a moment to get together. They're on the Zoom now. We're just going to get that on the screen. So they'll be sharing from there, and we might need a minute just to make an adjustment there for them. Okay, Monica, Karen, and Penny. When you're ready, yes, you can share your presentation and get underway. I think we're nearly there. Are they sharing it? Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh. And oh yes, remember to unmute. Very important.
Kia ora, can you hear us?
We can hear you.
Fantastic, awesome. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Monica Cameron taku ingoa, he kaiara he matauranga me te pukinga mātua e te rito maioha.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Karen Aspen toko ingoa, ko te kura o te matauranga e mahi ana ki te kuninga ki Purihuroa. We'd also just like to acknowledge our colleagues Penny Smith and Tara McLaughlin, who are not able to be with us today, but who have been key members of this, the project that we're going to be sharing with you, and we just want to acknowledge them, and sorry they can't be with us, but trust that we'll carry their message as well. Kia ora. So it's my pleasure to just offer a brief introduction to the project that we're sharing on today. The genesis of this program was this research was a few years ago now, as we looked to the introduction of the refreshed TeWhāriki. We both, our team all work in initial teacher education. We do much of our mahi is around encouraging student teachers into TeWhāriki and using it as an effective part of their teaching journey. And we were really curious as part of that role to understand how teachers that we were, the teachers in the sector were making use of TeWhāriki as part of their teaching journey, and how there might be a shift sort of post the refresh. We were really curious about what it might bring about. So we established a project that collected data in the immediate period of time before the refresh was released to the sector. And then we have been back this year to collect data again several years post the refresh implementation to see whether there may have been shifts in practice, shifts in viewpoint, shifts in beliefs over that period of time. We are also hopeful, though you never know, we're hopeful that in another 5 years we might be able to go back and go through this project again in the same way and to see further shifts over that, that sort of 10-year period. We think that would be really, really interesting and really valuable. We started from the position of just how much of a taonga we saw Te Whāriki as being, and really wanting to capture that and to get an understanding of how teachers were using this document, this taonga, in implementing, and were implementing Te Whāriki as part of their daily practice. And also to try and get an understanding of how teachers were constructing their understanding of curriculum, how they viewed curriculum, how they enacted curriculum, what they believed about curriculum, all sort of formed the foundation of this research. So what we're presenting today is just a very small snapshot from the 2017 and 2023 data. We'd like to acknowledge that we literally only received the 2023 data within a very short period of time. So there wasn't the opportunity to have yet dug deeply into this data, and we look forward to doing so and coming to further presentations and publications that really do a deep dive into the wonderful data we've collected. But this is just a quick look on top of our initial pass through in the trends that we're seeing. Kia ora, we hope you enjoy this.
So in terms of having a bit of an overview of what we did, we sought to replicate the studies across the different time spans, and we started by identifying a range of different types of early childhood services, so mixed age, under twos and kindergartens, and set up interviews as an integral part of that. So talking with a teacher and a leader in each of those 6 settings that we started with. Alongside of those interviews, we also collected photographs of the indoor and outdoor environments when children were not present as further evidence of curriculum and how it impacted on the environment that children had the opportunity to engage with. The photographs that you'll see through this presentation come from the most recent round of data collection and highlight some of the ways we were able to see curriculum in the environment. Alongside the interviews and the photographs, we also collected a range of documents from the services involved that highlighted the ways in which they shared information about curriculum as a team, but also with parents, whānau and community. And as part of that, examples of assessment as a way of gathering data about how assessment was not only shared with families, but it also was informed by curriculum. As I said, so in 2017, we had 6 sites, and we looked to replicate by going back to their same 6 sites for what had planned to be a 2022 data gathering. But as you all know, COVID has had a long tail and had impact, and that wasn't going to work for a number of the settings who'd participated the first time, but they were very happy to do so this year. So the data was collected in the earlier part of this year, and we approached those same 6 settings, but one setting chose not to participate this time, and one of the settings had actually closed down. So we've ended up in the 2023 data set with 4 settings, and we replicated the data collection methods. So those have stayed the same, but it's also important to note that while we stayed with the same 6 settings that transferred into the 4, there had been staffing changes within those settings as well, and those are going to be interesting to track. And so you'll see later on in the presentation, there's quotes there from setting 1 leader 2017 and 2023, for example, but they're not actually the same person. It's the same position, same setting, same position, but different people. So that's going to be something for us to unpack as we delve further into that data. So, and of course, data analysis. we'll be using a range of tools in that space, but predominantly thematic analysis. And as Karen indicated earlier, the focus here is on sharing interview data along with some photographs and the preliminary analysis of the 2023 data.
Kia ora. So I get the opportunity to talk a little bit around the question of what is curriculum. In our interview, we in talking with the teachers and leaders, we asked them to define and explain for us what their understanding of curriculum meant. We explored, as Helen so beautifully talked about, the idea of curriculum and curriculum framework and those sort of how that terminology reflects how it is viewed. But so we got an understanding of what teachers really thought curriculum was, and we put a couple of quotes there that we've drawn from across the data sets for you to engage with. But what really was the narrative thread that ran through both sets of data is this idea that curriculum is a holistic experience, which seems so true to the idea of Te Whāriki, and that curriculum is really that sense of everything that happens in an early childhood setting. Just about every teacher referred back to that wholesale experience of coming into that service and what that meant for children. When looking at the 2023 data, that same emphasis seems to have continued on. And what's really interesting is this idea that curriculum is really something that has become embodied in this idea of local curriculum as well. So the curriculum is living and breathing and embodied and enacted rather than being something that is just intellectually explained or noted. It is something that's really deeply inherent in who the services are, the people that are there, the community that is there, that really does create this embodied holistic curriculum experience. As can be seen in the quotes, you see those words holistic, embedded, integrated come through really strongly. So throughout, there's this confirmation of curriculum being seen as encompassing and reflective of everything that takes place in the daily life of an early childhood setting. But we did see a shift in 2023 that we're going to pick up on a little bit later, towards a shift in the understanding of the role of the teacher and intentional teaching sitting alongside that holistic play-based child-centred approach to curriculum. Kia ora.
So something that we were really interested in is where teachers' knowledge of Te Whāriki had come from. And when we looked at the original data, we could see that teachers talked a lot about their knowledge developing over time as they had engaged with the curriculum. And I think that was something that Helen noted in her keynote earlier, that we've had this curriculum for 20, 30 years now, where in other countries have changed curriculum, modified significantly, whereas here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we've had the same consistent curriculum that teachers have had the opportunity to really get to know and to hopefully embed in their practice. They felt that they were very familiar with the content, and they identified their colleagues as being a source of knowledge and helping them to understand Te Whāriki. For some teams, they acknowledged that there was real strength in that continuity of Te Whāriki, and that it brought them together and gave them a shared focus and an opportunity for developing shared understandings. But it was also important to note that there were, alongside that, opportunities for what Wenger calls dysfunctional communities of practice, whereby teams may not know that there were other ways of engaging, other ways of doing things, because it becomes a little bit insular, for want of a better word. And so what we could see happening is some of the questions we asked about were about the refresh. So when we collected this data, everybody knew that a refreshed curriculum was coming. There had been some PLD locally, which teachers had engaged in. And so we asked them about, what do you think are the opportunities here? And some of what came through was that opportunity to come together and to learn from a wider group. And it does appear that when scanning the 2023 data, that just using and engaging with the refreshed document has again been a primary way of becoming familiar with its content. As Helen talked about earlier, the refreshed version wasn't just on the shelf. It was a new document. It had come out. And so teams and individuals were unpacking it, looking at the content, looking for similarities and looking for differences. What most participants did note, however, was that there were few opportunities to engage in sustained PLD that were focused on the refreshed document. So while some had engaged in the online PLD that was available at the time, others reflected that they were still looking for more PLD in this space, and remembering that this data was collected almost 6 years after the refreshed version had come out. But yeah, that sense of an opportunity to talk and collaborate and share together was something that participants really appeared to value. And when we looked at how TeWhāriki has been implemented, teachers and the participants in this study spoke very, very positively about TeWhāriki. They saw it as an important guide for informing their day-to-day practice with tamariki, and they valued the curriculum as a framework that supported and acknowledged children and that shaped their connection to family, whānau, and community as well. What was really interesting was that so much of the participants' understandings of TeWhāriki did appear to be implicit and taken for granted. And so when we often initially asked interview questions, there would be some quite long pauses at times as teachers and the participants in the study tried to think about that, because so much of this, that stance that Karen talked about earlier of the curriculum being everything and all the experiences and the interactions with people, places and things, and those were all seen to be a living enactment, but at times that became quite hard to put into words. They talked about it, we just do it. And so then putting that into words at times was a little bit more difficult. They also acknowledged that there is so much strength within the scope of TeWhāriki to allow for the diversity that is present within our communities and within the different range of service types in the sector, but that there was also space in which attention could be created due to that diversity, where it became really hard to know what effective curriculum implementation might look like, because it was so varied for each different setting. Of note, many of the participants in the study spoke positively of the refreshed version. They talked about it being much easier to navigate, the colour coding of the different sections, the inclusion of photographs, for example, but that they also really appreciated the more detailed information around the roles and responsibilities of kaiako. We seem to also be seeing some evidence that teachers are engaging with the document as a whole and all of those sections, rather than just prioritising the strands and goals, which we did hear quite a bit of in the first round of data collection. We are thinking that given the recent gazetting of the goals and learning outcomes of TeWhāriki, that might be a trend that we continue to see a bit more of over the coming years.
Given the research background that some of our team had, we were also really interested to explore how teachers were navigating the ideas of play-based learning and intentional teaching, and how those interconnected, and the nature of the teaching and learning relationship that was taking place. We were really curious to explore that. When we first went into the first round of data collection pre-refresh, there was not a strong sense of an articulation of intentional teaching coming through particularly, though when you probed, it was quite clear that it was happening. It just wasn't perhaps made explicit or verbalised in that way. It was quite clear that teachers were describing very intentional practices on their part, but maybe not articulating it within that particular lens. And with that fear still, commented on that risk of not wanting to take over children's play, or not wanting to cut across or to be too adult directed, the risk of moving to something like national standards, or moving to more didactic teaching that might be seen with older tamariki. So but in comparison, in the data that we've collected for 2023, we can see that language of teaching coming through quite a lot more strongly in the data that we've collected, which does reflect its repositioning, I think, in the refresh document, where the teacher's role is articulated a little bit more, and the place of intentional teaching has been sort of highlighted and been part of the narrative that's starting to build. Still very much, though, we really want to affirm, still very much situated in as an interplay at an intersection of play and intentional teaching as being part of rich co-constructive experiences of sustained shared thinking, of that rich pedagogical understanding of what it means to enact curriculum. And that really has come through a little bit more strongly in the 2023 data. There were much more explicit references to intentional teaching strategies, to supporting inclusive education and strategies to supporting learners with additional needs. And that's still that sense, so coming through, that was quite clear in the 2017 data of teachers wrestling with their role, of wondering how to conceptualize it, how to understand where they might position themselves on that continuum, and how to see these things, how to not lose the essence of play and freedom and exploration, investigation, while still also honouring the role of teachers and what they bring to the learning moment. And we are seeing that in that we can note a really reflecting those shifts that Helen phrased so beautifully earlier, with increasing socio-cultural lens and an increasing cultural lens as well, coming to bear on shifting away from like traditional developmental trajectories, perhaps more to much more detailed socio-cultural lenses, and how learning in relationship with people, places and things was becoming even more evident. Yeah.
So as Karen's just talked about, though, on the previous slide, we acknowledge the developing understandings of intentional teaching and that how they have supported teachers to further develop their own understandings of their role in supporting children's learning. It's really important to note that across both data sets, teachers still prioritise the importance of play and the role of child agency, but can increasingly see themselves in co-constructing within an ARCL relationship with learners. At this point, we think that this suggests a growing awareness of the influence of sociocultural theories and the active role that teachers should play in supporting children's learning. It also appears that there is an increasing recognition of the teacher's role in supporting identity, language and culture, as well as more inclusive practices. This more explicit guidance for kaiako that is included in the refreshed version, and we can see for some participants has supported them to develop their understandings and to change their practices, but as is always the case, less so for others. Evidence of this is potentially shown when comparing the quotes, two of the quotes we have here on the screen. The blue quote from a teacher in 2017, which describes a much more child-led and perhaps Piagetian informed role for the teacher, compared to the two quotes here from 2023, which demonstrate for these teachers they're seeing themselves in a much more active role in supporting children's learning.
So as we bring the session to a close, as you'll be glad as we head towards lunchtime, we are bringing it to a close. We wanted to identify some of the changes and challenges that we are briefly seeing and look forward to exploring in more depth. First of all, we just want to reinforce the deep respect, and I'm going to use the word love, that people do have for Te Whāriki, and that was really evident in our data. There's a positive sense out there generally around the refresh, and that it has been re-energising. I did find it surprising, some of the interviews, to hear how people had sort of really come to take the original version of Te Whāriki somewhat for granted, that had become sort of just on the desk and maybe not utilised in regular practice, whereas having the new version had drawn them back into the document. And as you'll see in the quote from setting 4, the teacher who's been teaching for well over 30 years talked about how her original document had no notes or anything in it, whereas the new version was filled with highlights and post-it notes and so forth. So it was an interesting analogy. We also want to acknowledge in this data collection that teachers had been in survival mode for a large period of this time, with particularly through the COVID and the lockdown experiences and beyond. We know that there are so many pressures on our sector that have teachers really in survival mode in many ways, and so that has implications for engagement with curriculum. And we acknowledge that there are still calls out there for genuine interest in sustained PLD that will help services to really engage with the full scope, the depth and the breadth of Te Whāriki as this robust, really complex document. Challenges that seem to persist will be for teams to continue developing effective communities of practice. And I would like to pick up here on a point that Helen noted, which was Te Whāriki was intended for a fully qualified teaching that's what I'm looking for, teaching workforce, thank you. And that isn't the current climate. And so we are having services who are navigating both qualified and unqualified staff to bring them together to find unity in that document and in their teaching. So we remain challenges around building those effective communities of practice, a recognition that of the longevity of Te Whāriki and what that means when you've had teachers who may have been working in that document for 25 years and then moving into the new document versus, for example, our graduates coming out from our programs who have only ever known potentially the refreshed document. And what that means is they navigate their communities of practice. And then as we look forward, it's around questions around what resources might sit around Te Whāriki, around assessment and planning and all the other dimensions that really take Te Whāriki and use and build on its foundations to really guide practice in other domains. As Helen said, there were many areas originally that Te Whāriki was intended to address that we now might need to look to supplementary work to marry alongside. So that continues, I think, to be maybe not a challenge, but also an opportunity.
So some takeaway messages that we're confident in that we see across the two data sets is that Te Whāriki is seen to be guiding all that happens in early childhood education settings here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, both back in 2017 and now in 2023. It is viewed as a taonga for the early childhood sector and is valued for its bicultural foundation that it sets up for each and every early childhood service. Teachers appeared to appreciate the revision and the increased accessibility of particularly the learning outcomes, and noting that the revision down to 20 was much more manageable and accessible for teachers. Teachers were able to talk broadly about Te Whāriki, but at times were less confident in explicitly describing how it is implemented in their daily practice. Te Whāriki affirms the relational pedagogy that is deeply embedded in early childhood education here in Aotearoa, whilst also acknowledging that challenges remain in balancing a child-led curriculum with the need to engage in intentional teaching. And this appeared to be a challenge that was really forefronted for our participants. Despite the appearance of some progress in relation to understandings of intentional teaching, this was not necessarily consistent across all participants yet. So what next for us is we need to move beyond preliminary data analysis and analysing the 2023 data, so that we're then in a position to more accurately compare that with the 2017 data.
We're also hopeful that maybe in 2027, who knows, that we might be able to go out and collect data again to see where the state of the sector and curriculum is at that point. And I imagine that Helen, as a historian, would be happy about that we would capture this progress over time.
And of course, like is always the case with research, more dissemination and more publishing. We recently had an article published in the Waikato Journal of Education around the 2017 data with a focus on the interviews. We need to bravely, boldly step into some analysis of the documents and the photographs, which for us is a little bit out of our comfort zone. And so we need to get on and do that, as well as creating spaces to compare and show how teachers' implementation of curriculum has changed in those intervening years. So any questions? I'll stop share.
to take any questions, or we'll let everyone go for lunch.
I think everyone's digesting. But if anyone's got some, keep forgetting about this. If anyone's got some questions for these lovely people, you would be able to find them on the Zoom and message them throughout the afternoon, because I know sometimes it takes a few minutes to think through what's being presented. Thank you to our presenters and to all of those who presented in the stream. And thank you for everyone's quiet and respectful attendance. We're going to stop now and go for Kai in the main room. So thank you.
Share screen. No, it's screen one, isn't it?
Then we go. So you got all this.
Right.
That's your
Yep.
turn.
Yep.
Bam.
Cheers. So I won't bother redoing your presentation because it's in there. Because when we did it in Sydney, yours was in there. Yeah. All right. At least it's worth it. 1:15 start. When they get here.
We do have a few more people coming in, but I think if we just get started, at least maybe get the introduction going.
It's not culturally. This way it's not. Yeah. Oh, here comes Linda. Any more coming? Good. We've got people online too, haven't we? Yeah. Okay. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, ena mana, ena reo, ena rangatira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Oh, photo of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So that's the last time we did this presentation. It was over. You were there, weren't you? In Sydney? Yeah, so that's why that's there. Anyway. So we acknowledge the tangata whenua of Tauranga Moana, past and present, Ngāti Pukenga, Ngāi Te Rangi, and Ngāti Ranganui in terms of this presentation. Ko te awa ko o te awa, ko Aotea te waka, ko Wanganui te awa, ko Ahutu rawa ko Ikarangi nā maunga, ko Ati Hanui a Paparangi te iwi, ko Mata Hiwi rawa ko Koroniti nā marae, ko Piedmonti Takuinga, ko Tumuaki o nā Kohanga Manawa Nui. I have to apologise or pay tribute to my colleague Marion Decker, who's on a sabbatical in Europe at the moment, in the middle of the Paris riots. We normally do this as a tag team, so bear with me if it doesn't work. So yeah, there's lots of photos of Moao today, and another one just to situate most of our kindergartens. So our education for sustainability journey will cover these points. So we're tracing the journey of the former, what used to be called Tauranga Region kindergartens, and because there's no such thing as Tauranga Region, we thought we'd better come up with a new name. But since 2008, focusing on the expansion of the project beyond the original 2 activist kindergartens to the whole organisation, involving the Enviro Schools movement, now called the Taumata Foundation, our local regional council. It references the challenges and opportunities for children, teachers, whānau, and community learning. Our interactions with Te Māori, notably the engagement with mana whenua in developing local curriculum, which acknowledges their tūranga waiwai, and the encouragement of teachers and children to be agents for change, and the challenges of the status quo. And also, just briefly, our plan to become power, we call it the Power Project, to become energy self-sufficient. So just a little bit about who we are. We have up to 1,300 plus children in 25 kindergartens and a home-based education service. We operate in the Coromandel and the Bay of Plenty, and our most southerly kindergarten is in Murupara, that we reopened after being closed by our neighbouring association. And I think they love us down there, but every time I go down there, I get patted, well looked after. We're a not-for-profit community-based charity. We have bicultural relationships with local iwi based on the Treaty of Waitangi policy and the TeWhāriki. We have 100% qualified teacher workforce in ratioed positions and early learning. We aim to have early learning partnerships with parents and whānau. We like to think that we provide authentic learning experiences with the space, and there was a comment from our recent ERO reviewers to say how huge our grounds are. I'd like to see them bigger actually, but there we are. They're bigger than some other places where it seems modern centres are pretty much at the regulatory minimum. But we aim at building self-confidence, independence and individuality amongst our tamariki. Just explaining Ngā Kohanga Mana Wanui, recently translated as the nest for the strong-hearted nest for the young, which I think was gifted to us by one of our kaumātua when we changed our Pākehā name as well. So just briefly, this PowerPoint, these are the rationales that we base our program on. UNESCO, a couple of comments from UNESCO. Julie Davis, who's a lecturer, or last I heard, she was hopefully still a lecturer at Queensland University, and the guiding principles of Enviro Schools: empowered children, sustainable communities, learning for sustainability with Māori perspectives, and respect for diversity of people and cultures. So just very briefly, our values: aroha, being the best we can be and for the good of children. I won't go through the mana, manakitanga, welcoming. And most recently, in respect of our journey, we added, and I can't remember when, but it's reasonably recent, it wasn't part of the original package, kaitiakitanga, because we recognised that that should be a value if we're going to have an education for sustainability program. We're blessed to work in beautiful environments. We honour Papatua Nuku and with respect and dignity for now and future generations. And the reason the natural world's in there is because this was a presentation done in Sydney, and they wouldn't have known what Papatua Nuku was. So, that's a poster or a banner that Enviro Schools did for us that sets out our journey. We've got it on the walls of our office, and there is a banner that you can hang, but every time we've tried to take it to a lecture theatre and stuff, we can't find anywhere to hang it on. They don't seem to have those. The old days you had coat hooks or something to hang it on, but I will talk about that. So 2005, two of our kindergartens joined the Enviro Schools. In 2009, soon after, actually I'll take some responsibility for this, soon after I got there, I went, hey, why if we're doing it such a good job, and two, why aren't we doing it across the whole organisation? So in 2009, the board, it's a governance policy, adopted a policy for education for sustainability to give it some chutzpah, some strength, and was reflected in the strategic plan of 2010 to 2015. In 2015, we managed to get 2 green gold reflections, which is the highest status or value that, in Enviro Schools. And there's various bits and pieces. 2 teachers attended conferences, and we ended up talking to the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, who provided us with funding to run some of our programs. We have relationships, strategic approach we're on to. Okay, cool, got it. So we have had a strategic relationship with the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, particularly with academia, and particularly with this institution. Some of those who were here earlier, Linda's worked with Maunganui Kindergarten. We've had previously Kelly's worked with Papa Moa Kindergarten, and what else? Oh, and the home-based, our home-based service as well. So, now who did the Avenues? Who did the Avenues one? Jane White did the Avenues study, Avenues Kindergarten study on the language of 2-year-olds. Yeah, we're going to get that right, because sometimes you say under twos, the language of 2-year-olds in the kindergarten environment. So we see it as actually taking a strategic approach, that it's within teaching and learning, but it's also within our buildings. So we've run programs across the kindergarten, all our kindergartens, to ensure that they're making best use of electricity, and where necessary, we've put more switches on, because in the old days you walked in, you turn the lights on, it's like, the whole place is, and there might be not a child in there, but the whole place is blazing with light. So putting switches in where you can monitor it has improved our electronic usage. When we look at our environments, if you come in, you're more than welcome. Come and have a look at our environments. You won't see much plastic. You won't see many boxes, because what we believe is in natural environments. Having said that, if we've already got them, we don't just necessarily throw them out. We make use of them until they die, and you will see, those big plastic slides, which are really cool, and you can't get them other than in plastic. So if you get them in wood, probably cost you about, it's not particularly sustainable. So it also appears it's a focus when we come to our policies and procedures, and there's a professional learning budget specifically for Enviro schools. We have 2 facilitators that we've trained as part of the Enviro Schools Toimata Foundation, and our partners, as I say, are iwi, LTS, local territorial authorities. We have a company called Sustainability Options. They've worked very closely with us. They're a not-for-profit company, which is pretty cool. And also other local groups such as the Pacific Islands Community Trust. We've established our new Pacifica Kindergarten in association with them. And in Katikati, the local community trust, Sustainable Community Trust, in terms of, I'll tell you a little bit about the program that they've developed up here. But since this is a discussion about TeWhāriki, we better just do a couple of connections. So in the 1996 version, the only thing, and this is, I suppose, one of the positives about the review, was that the only thing I could find about, if you like, about education for sustainability was knowledge about physical and spiritual significance of the local community. So we were quite happy in the olden days to hang our hat on that. But since 2017, I think there's been a bit of a sea change about education for sustainability. So you'll find 3 statements I could find, there might be more, making connections between people, places and things in their world, te wāhanga hononga, taking part in caring for this place, te manaki, te tau, and kaitiakitanga guardianship and environmental stewardship. So I think the move towards education or sustainability across our culture has been reflected in the curriculum, and very much supports the work we do. So just onto some stories, really cool. Hopefully they'll find them cute. Papamoa Coast Kindergarten. Bit of a shame that it's called Papamoa Coast. Got named before I got here. We'd had a much more. We've got a Papamoa Kindergarten as well, so a kilometre away. Papamoa Coast Kindergarten, regular excursions to the beach at Papamoa, and there's a photo of them at the beach. And they found this drain there, and it had some pretty ugly coloured liquid coming out of it. So the children were a bit concerned about that, because it was their beach where they swam went with their whānau and families in the weekend. And so the teachers there said, well, what are we going to do about that? And so they checked out the grates and the drains, and there's an old photo. This is quite an old story that Caroline Darby there, she's now at another kindergarten, has moved on. But they checked out the drains. They went, I'll go back one. what they did was they said, with the help of the teachers, they wrote to the council. They said, we want to do something about that drain. It is not appropriate that coloured stuff that looked really, noxious was coming out of what was a stormwater drain. So they, with the help of the teachers, they wrote to the council, and interestingly, I think it was possibly because it came from 4 and 5-year-olds, the council went, oh, we're going to do something about that. We don't want the kindergarten coming down on us. So they did something, and there's a picture of the children seeing that the truck that's the truck that came along that cleaned up with a crane, and they cleaned up the drain. So in the next photo, there it is. It's all nice and clean with the guy from the council explaining to the teachers and the children about what they'd done. So it was a environmental project that the children engaged in, but it was also an opportunity for them to provide advocacy for their environment, and obviously for the environment generally. Moving on to, this is Katikati Kindergarten. It's also, I'm pretty sure it's a green gold kindergarten under Enviro Schools. And they had a regular excursion to a nearby park, which had a walkway through it. And what they decided was, well, they should plant some fruit trees. And I think they've planted a couple of hundred or something. I mean, some of them have died and been stolen and all the rest of it, but over time. And so it becomes, not only is it beautifying the environment, but it becomes a resource for the community as well. So parents and whānau will come along when the fruit's ripe. Hopefully they share it around and don't rip it all off. But the kindergarten and the parents have been engaged in developing. They call it the Kati Kaiway. Probably not quite politically correct. For those that were here earlier, there's the Maua Hikoi that's undertaken by our, well, not here, we're in the other room, by our Mona Maunganui kindergarten. Another example is up in Whangamata, our most northern kindergarten, have been, in part of their excursions, they've been going to the local awa, and again, have been noticing that, well, not as clean as it could be. And I did hear at one of the hui this morning about the tuna being the guardians of the awa. And so part of their kaupapa is to feed and ensure that the tuna are well looked after, fed, etc. And therefore they can act as guardians for the awa. And then also further up in Whitianga, and this just shows what you can do. This is probably not something you'd find in many home-based services, that they stay at home. Well, they don't stay at home up in Whitianga. One of the home-based educators spied some hutakawa leaves floated from her neighbour's place, and so in the area they started planting the hutakawa and again in the walkway, and you'll see there that it's been labelled the Inspired Creek, because not only have they planted them, and actually they're looking pretty tall now, those ones, yeah, but they maintain that area as well. 30 of the putakawas were planted and have survived up until we did this presentation. That's it. Any questions or comments? That was really quick. There's plenty of time for you. Marion would be more loquacious if she were here, I'm sure. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. And I mean, yes, and to be fair, we've missed out other stories that some of our other places do for the sake of time. Yeah. Well, I'm very proud of the work that our teachers do, and it's one of the features, one of the what should I say? One of the features we look for in terms of when we employ new teachers, that they have that disposition to the environment, or an openness to it. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Aye, yeah. Sorry, and yeah, Mr. Did the PowerPoint about the power project come up? No. Sorry, right, I'll just very briefly then say, after we'd done, made our places as efficient as possible with electricity, well, sorry, what next? So, and we were lucky that Trust Power, which no longer exists, unfortunately, Trust Power had a system where you could, if you generated power, you could transfer it to a buddy. I think it's still operating. I think I saw something on my last power bill, but now that it's with Mercury, I don't know how long that's going to last. So we took advantage of that, and we've currently got 10 kindergartens with solar panels on their roofs, and those 10 kindergartens support another 10 kindergartens with the generation. So we aimed, part of the plan was to be power self-sufficient by 2025, but be fair to say the Bay of Plenty Regional Council over recent times have cut the amount that they're putting into the environment, and that's we haven't got the same access to, and TECT now, of course. TECT don't own any Trust Power share. Don't know. TECT is our Energy Consumer Trust over in Tauranga. They don't now own Trust Power, so they don't have the same commitment to supporting electrical. Oh, sorry, I'm the camera. To supporting electrical hardware. So those changes are a bit problematic for us. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes. 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 So an example would be, come on, the Otamarako Marae is Ngāti Ma. Come on. You've been there. Who's the Otamarako? No? Not you. So, oh gosh. So it'll come to me, of course. But anyway, as an example, so we have a small kindergarten at Otamarako, which is in the far east, as far east as we go in Aotearoa. And as a result of the connection that they have with the local marae there, we've held, we had a 2-day Enviro school session held at their marae, where they were able to present their what are they doing? They're replanting their awa to clean it up, essentially. So that was part of the collaboration, and we had about 30 or 40 of our teachers turn up in their non-required time to attend that hui over 2 days, and it was a noho marae as well. We do see, as part of our commitment to the Toimata Foundation, that Māori perspective should be incorporated into the Enviro Schools movement. And we ran not a repeat, but a second workshop, wānanga at Whetū o Te Rangi Marae, Ngāti Pūkenga's marae, out in back of Welcome Bay, where I have to say, I didn't go to that one, where teachers discussed Māori perspectives and bringing them into the Enviro Schools frame. Yeah. So the answer is yes, Jilly. And we'll come. We operate no other than we operate a fleet of vans that particularly in our low socioeconomic areas. A fleet, when I say fleet, I think it's 3 or 4. Thinking Karaimaramu, I can't remember the others. There's Karaimaramu, Taiwhenua, Breton, and one other. So that actually does take traffic off the roads by operating a van. I know it's petrol, and yeah, Chris, yep. Chad, yeah. Yeah. Yes is the answer to that. Yes, we have. What's the right word? Everybody's on a different journey. So yes, we have three, as I say, 3 green goals. So that's the top of the Enviro Schools pile. And we have some, and I can't remember the number, there might be 5 that have no commitment to Enviro Schools. Having said that, the policy that we have in terms of education for sustainability requires certain actions on their behalf. The Enviro Schools processes sort of sit on top of that. By passing the policy, it does give us as leaders the right to be able to go, what are you doing about recycling? What are you doing about your power? We would prefer that they were coming on board, and we've had, I think we've now got 3 or 4 of the non-Toi Mata Foundation ones actually coming on. They now have done the bronze reflection. So, and there might be another couple. So it is a journey. Yeah. Thank you. No problem. Oh. That might be. Oh, yes. Pardon?
Yes.
Do I need that?
You can use that one if you want.
That way?
Yeah.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. It's not designed really well for that.
Let's not worry about that.
Do you want to?
Kia ora.
There
Oh,
we go.
yes. Oh, look. Okay. Righto. Last session before the plenary. Okay. See, I've already jumped, have I? No, I haven't. Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko Wendy Lee aho. E mihi ana ki ngā tohu o nehe I tēnei rohi o tainui e noho nei au. Ko tēnei taku mihi ki te tangata whenua o te rohi nei, no reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm absolutely thrilled, with anticipation actually, to share this work, somewhat nervous. Today I have the privilege of sharing with you a glimpse into the captivating narrative, the dynamic life of learning stories. As we delve into this presentation, I want you to imagine yourselves joining me on a visual expedition. Some of the slides will unfold like a video. I had 200 initially, all's well, I don't any longer, offering you a window into a world teeming with imagery. Through these glimpses, I hope to provide you with a broader perspective of the remarkable journey we have embarked on. However, I acknowledge that our time together, how does this thing move? Excuse me? Oh. That bit that I was trying to work.
Yeah, no mouse. Just put use the mouse wheel, that should be good. If you just
Clearly, I'm not very competent at the mouse.
no, so if you just click on there before you do it, then you should be able to move it around.
Oh dear. Okay, let me see if I can get this mouse under control. No, I clearly can't. Yeah, but this is. Okay, so however, I acknowledge that our time together is limited, and in just a little more maybe than 20 minutes, I can only scratch the surface of this vast and ever-evolving landscape of learning stories, but I am committed to capturing the essence and vitality of learning stories during our time together. I'm delighted to do this work, but I'm a little bit sad that Margaret can't be with us, because she certainly had hoped to be here today and was very much looking forward to the day. The wisdom and insights I've gained from Margaret are immeasurable. I feel an immense responsibility to honour her work at every opportunity that presents itself. Margaret's journey has shaped my journey, and her influence has been profound, and I'm deeply grateful for all that I've learned from her. I'm driven by a passion to uphold the integrity of the work
and to share its transformative potential with educators in Kaiako from Aotearoa and beyond. As we all know, ka whāngaia ka tupu ka puawai, that which is nurtured blossoms and grows. We have much to thank this amazing group. Now, if you look at, I mean, all of us know the work that Margaret, Helen, Tilly and Tamati have done. And the consultative process was extraordinary. The gifting of the principles, strands and metaphor by Tilly and Tamati, and the deeply thoughtful sociocultural frame of belonging, well-being, exploration, communication and contribution was what made this curriculum world-leading, and I believe has been unmatched in process and consultation anywhere in the world. So let's take a closer look at this diagram, which offers a glimpse into the rich historical background that shaped the development of learning stories. And as you can see, it reflects the sheer intensity of the work that unfolded during the early stages of this incredible journey, involving a multitude of passionate individuals. One pivotal project that emerged was the project for assessing children's experiences. It was Margaret who secured the contract for this groundbreaking endeavour, aiming to explore how assessment practices could align with the newly introduced Te Whāriki curriculum. It was a shared understanding among everyone involved that without addressing this assessment issue, we would miss out on fully embracing the benefits of this transformative curriculum. Margaret's remarkable journey took her through five distinct settings, each offering a unique context for her research. She worked with Te Kohanga Reo, a childcare centre, a kindergarten, a home-based setting, and a play centre. Here is a glimpse into the research project in the kindergarten setting, which is the one I was involved with. And these are some images from the Great Gate project. It took place at Insole Kindergarten. It was about real work, a real project. Nothing, when we talk about play-based and all the powerful things inside TeWhāriki, this was very visible inside this part of the project. This would, for instance, in this context, it would result in a new gate for the kindergarten. Throughout the project, all were encouraged to write narrative as they observed children at play. Out of this work came the Assessing Children's Experiences in Early Childhood. This was the research report. And this was followed by a very successful result that some of you will recognise with a similar title. I'll always remember that moment when Margaret came back to the group and shared what she had been reading, everyone's observations and narratives. And she exclaimed, "I know what I'm reading learning stories." It was truly inspiring, and we shouldn't underestimate the significance of the bringing together of Te Whāriki and Margaret's PhD focused on learning dispositions. It was a powerful combination that sparked a whole new understanding and approach to assessment in early childhood education. The concept of learning stories resonated deeply with us as it encompassed the essence of children's learning and development, honouring their unique dispositions and strengths. It was a turning point that set us on a transformative path, shifting our mindset and practice towards a more holistic and meaningful approach to assessment. Many of you will recognise this framework and the contribution it has made to bringing understanding to the underlying pedagogical principles involved inside Te Whāriki. Then in 2001, Margaret wrote this book, which would be a seminal piece of work on assessment. And as she said in the book, when we began, I think the practitioners and I wanted to seize the notion of assessment, shake it around a bit, turn it upside down, and find something that was part of enjoying the company of young children. Let's go back 30 plus years, when the assessment culture in early childhood education was negative, deficit, and focused on endless documentation that had little to do with curriculum and planning. To support the shift in learning stories, a humorous and powerful movie was created by Julie Killick. The film entertained and delivered a message of change, highlighting the importance of valuing children's strengths and adopting a holistic approach to assessment. It became a catalyst for transforming assessment practices, sparking conversations amongst educators. The first major development post Te Whāriki was Kei Tū o Te Pai and involved a wide range of people in advisory roles, coordinator roles, and of course, Te Rōpū Kai Whakanunu. The first tranche resulted in 9 books. We worked on this project for a decade. The first 9 books. On completion, a blessing was held, and Trevor Mallard, and none of us should forget the impact that he had on the early childhood sector. during the period where he was a Minister of Education. Here's Meriana, who's now 21 years old, handing over Kei Tu'o Te Pai to Trevor Mallard during the blessing. This is Margaret's granddaughter. Trish Nally and Doreen Launder were the key Ministry of Education people involved, and here Margaret and I with Trevor Mallard as co-directors. Teachers in Kayako contributed, hundreds contributed. There was a total of 177 pieces of assessment and documentation used in the project, but hundreds and hundreds more were sent to us during the project. Following the celebration, we worked with professional development providers. We then went out into the regions, and finally more intensive in-centre work was carried out. All the while the vision was nurtured by the Ministry of Education, who regularly held hui tōpu to keep the vision in view, encouraging the providers to work collaboratively. How things have changed. The project culminated in 20 books on assessment. When the concept of assessment for learning was framed as noticing, recognising and responding, it sparked a transformative shift for many teachers in Kayako. It was like a homecoming, a return to the essence of when they entered teaching profession in the first place, to revel in the joy of children's company and to be their curious companion, genuinely interested in their unique voices. Those were exhilarating times. We encouraged teachers in Kayako to release their grip on rigid planning and instead be fully present with the tamariki. And where they embraced this approach, something truly magical unfolded. In those moments, connections were deepened, insights were gained, and authentic learning experiences blossomed. It was a reminder that the true art of teaching lies in the ability to truly see, hear, and respond to the wonders that unfold within each child. Move, please. Hit the right button. Here is some of the original documentation. This was written more than 20 years ago by Julie, all the while being totally responsive to Tim and his deep curiosity about vacuum cleaners and electricity. A responsive Kayako in action. Or Vicky, when she wrote about pihiketi and added a response to the mother in her own language, which would be more poetic and Māori. This is a warm greeting to you and your son, Pihiketi. My heart is filled with joy to listen to your son speaking about Papa Tuanuku. He is a brave child to embrace his language and customs. Learning stories are not just confined to a single learning story. They have embarked on an extraordinary journey encompassing a whole philosophy of documentation. Let me fill you in on some of the exciting range of narratives it entails. First, we have the classic learning stories, capturing the unique journeys of individual children. Then we expand our horizons to group or community stories, celebrating the collective experiences within a group setting. We also embrace stories from home, inviting families to share their perspectives and contributions to their child's learning. And of course, we honour the most important voices of all, the child's voice. Their thoughts, ideas, and reflections bring the narratives to life. There are also welcome stories, warmly inviting children into the learning environment. We value the power of the family voice, providing a platform for families to express their insights and aspirations and share their stories. Teachers' stories reflect their personal lives and their relationships, helping to build a stronger community of learners. So learning stories are not just a singular tale. They are a rich tapestry of narratives that weave together the voices and experiences of tamariki, whānau, and kayako. Together, this documentation creates a comprehensive and vibrant picture that truly captures the essence of learning and growth. A window into a response from a whānau written after the story, written by a teacher called Your Special Taonga, Karen. Dear Dean, this is the grandfather of the child, he responds, "What a thoughtful account, Karen, thanks for sharing this with us, but I'm not going to share it all, I'm just going to share the end of it. Look into the taonga and you will see Tyson there." This is him explaining where his greenstone came from. The shape signifies Tyson's creativity, passion, and energy. The marble colouring holds proud his blended Māori, European, and Niuean heritage. His strength and courage, his compassion and empathy are the rigidity and texture of the pounamu. The taonga is special because our moko makes it so. That's what you call connection. And then in 2017, responsibilities to refresh TeWhāriki, strengthening the bicultural curriculum. And obviously others are talking about that. Margaret Carr and I developed this logic model that outlines the concept of consequential validity. This model illustrates the process of building a learning community and fostering continuity in order to support the development of competence and learner identities. These outcomes are significant in and of themselves. It is, in my opinion, a very real view of what is happening in well-functioning early childhood settings around the documentation of learning stories. A learning story that captures and brings to our Māori lens by a Pākehā teacher, in this case, Catalina. This is what it looks like in the portfolio. No time to share. These stories, a taste. These stories woven into the fabric of the early childhood setting. Children sharing their stories, engaging in their learner identity. Here they are. Over more than 2 decades, we have shared the work of learning stories in many countries. I will just give you a brief window into China, Germany, and the USA. Very brief. Some countries we've worked with on long-term projects within settings, for example, in China. I will share a little window into some research I carried out with a group of Chinese teachers from various regions of China. Just a little of their commentary when thinking about the impact of learning stories in their settings. After learning and writing learning stories, what we found was a time of wow, a child's strength, a change in mindset, and we found a confident and capable learner. So those loved, self-confident, imaginative little painters, poets, architects, small mathematicians, small scientists have appeared before us. It's a revolutionary change. I like it a lot. Or someone else, after writing learning stories, I'm curious about children and about what they do every day. I understand children more. They're also more willing to tell me their thoughts. I trust them more, and I believe they are competent learners rather than that I have to teach them everything. I become more willing to give them more time and space. They constantly surprise me with and their potential is endless. We have worked in many cities in Germany and now have a strong collective of passionate practitioners who are leading the work in this country. But just to show you a little of the work of Isolde, who was originally teaching in Teachers College, teaching student teachers, retired and then began working with refugees. But she realized these refugees were not receiving any success when they came to applying for jobs. So she started writing learning stories about these young men. And this is just like a little window, a tiny window into one of the stories with some of the visuals that were inside the story. And here's a little of the sort of thing she was saying. Now you are visiting a technical college with German as a second language. Your class teacher informed me that you are a good pupil. She described you to be such as we know you in the refugee camp. You make friends easily. You are friendly. You take good care of yourself and others. You are attentive and you are reliable. For you, school is your job, your chance for a future. Well, what happened was they started getting jobs through the use of these stories. And finally, the USA. Much is happening across the USA, but I want to share the work of particularly Associate Professor Annie White from the California State University, Channel Islands. Work started in California State Channel Islands in 2009. Elizabeth Quintero came to a keynote on learning stories in England and was inspired by the work, and subsequently she began integrating the work into early childhood department at this university. The book on these are some of her books, so you can see that she was already deeply involved in a culture of story, and that book, Storying, Learning in Early Childhood, is where she really begins to explore learning stories. Because of this work, Annie White, who had already become passionate in learning stories, had been here on several visits, wanted to work at this university. And so I've obviously got no time to go through this entire timeline. But what I want to do is just show you some of the work that's been done in this university and how the work of learning stories has developed inside this learning story. I think it will give us some quite an interesting point of reflection. In the first instance, for instance, the students write these sort of experiences of writing their own stories around who they were as a child. Students on practicum begin to experience the power of stories written by local teachers because they are also, the student lecturers are teaching the teachers in the community about learning stories. This learning stories was written for a homeless family and challenged assumptions about the homeless when 4 family members responded to the learning story. This is an incredible program, a special course and paper called My Story, based on the learning story framework, which can be taken up by any student across the full university, where students write deeply about their lives and think about their future using the framework. The story, the analysis, what did I learn about myself? The third part, what am I going to take into my future? Here is Barbara's story, for example. The story honors diverse lived experience, social and cultural capital, relationships with peers, and acknowledges the important people that have influenced their identity. Here are some examples or some reasons that students write learning stories to exemplify their public service learning, their community engagement, and family and school interviews. And they are also used in the student's final assessment, where the learner writes a final assessment report and the lecturer, the university staff, respond to it. Obviously, one of the places that's made the book learning stories visible across the globe have been the books. Margaret's book on assessment has been translated into other languages. Here are examples from Italy, Japan, Denmark, and China. Likewise, these books have attracted translations. This book included the work of both learning stories and planning stories. There have been chapters in books about learning stories. Fabulous affirming statements by people like Professor Mary Jane Drummond from Cambridge University, who said, the New Zealand model of learning and assessment and the narrative method at its core have, I believe, enormous impact for educators in other places. In adopting the dominant metaphor of story in place of the tape measure or long jump, educators are committing themselves to taking the child's learning journey seriously as a process in its own life, with its own life and living landmarks. Or Tom Drummond, who writes so beautifully on his website, a learning story engages listeners in an adventure of childhood, enlivened with our own humanity and heart. Become a storyteller and share your voice. Or Deb Curtis and Margie Carter. We particularly favour the approach for assessment that is used in New Zealand with the tool referred to as learning stories, and hope it becomes widely used in the USA. Other people are writing their own books on learning story. Sibylla Haas in Germany wrote the first book, but she came to New Zealand and had deep collaboration with ELP before she did this. The Youth Institute wrote several books culminating in what was referred to as the Yellow Bible, but that is definitely another story. More recently, Cornelia Schreider has written a book focused on learning stories. Professor Kato from Kamakura Women's University in Japan has written books, as have others in Japan. Jane Zhao from China has been involved in writing 3 books on learning stories. Jane has been my key translator of my work in China. And finally, the fabulous work in the USA written about learning stories and teacher inquiry groups, reimagining teaching and assessment in early childhood education. Oops, I'm going to go past those, sorry. Learning stories make learning visible, strengthen relationships, build identity of the learner, engage the family, support transitions, evolve into planning stories and stories of interest, and contribute to accountability. Grow a community of learners, embed internal evaluation or action research, integrate professional learning, and provide opportunities for appraisal and opportunities for all to contribute. So, just in finishing off, crafting impactful learning stories means that you will forever be woven into the tapestry of children's lives. I have no doubt that many of the stories teachers in Kayako have penned will be passed down through the generations, with these tamariki reading them to their own grandchildren. Just imagine the incredible legacy and lasting impact of these narratives, carrying the essence of their experiences and growth. In those cherished moments, as the pages of these stories are turned and the words come alive once again, the bond between past and present, between kayako and learner, remains unbroken. It is a testament to the power of our words and the profound influence we have in shaping the narrative of children's journey. So, as we all embark on the beautiful task of writing learning stories, remember that your words have the potential to transcend time and touch the lives in ways you may never fully comprehend. Your stories will be cherished and treasured, forever connecting you to the hearts of those you have nurtured along their learning path. So write stories that make a difference. Recognise the privilege it is to enter children's lives in this way. This is the trace of your professional life.